At some point in history, thousands of ancient places stopped being part of the human world. Trade routes disappeared. Temples were left empty. Entire cities fell silent. In many cases, nature slowly covered everything, as if the planet itself was trying to erase them. Forests grew through stone walls, deserts buried roads beneath sand, and oceans swallowed coastlines that once held thriving civilizations. Centuries later, people returned and found traces of worlds that no longer made sense. Massive ruins standing far from water sources, underground networks built with unknown purpose, monuments aligned to patterns no one expected. The mystery of the ancient world is not just about how these places were built. It is about how so much knowledge could vanish while the evidence of it still remains. Northern Sudan, near the Nile's fourth cataract, holds a sandstone mountain rising alone from the flat desert horizon. Jebel Barkal was once believed to be the physical throne of the god Amun, but what truly terrifies archaeologists is not the mythology. It is the engineering hidden inside the mountain itself. Deep within fragile sandstone, ancient builders carved temples that should have collapsed thousands of years ago. Pigments inside those chambers still retain traces of red, blue, and yellow, despite temperatures exceeding 45 degrees Celsius. And some of the structures align with celestial events with an accuracy modern surveyors measured at less than 1 degree of error. The deeper researchers study Jebel Barkal, the more it begins to look less like an isolated religious site and more like evidence of a civilization whose technical knowledge has been dramatically underestimated. The site became known to modern archaeology during 19th century European expeditions into Nubia, but systematic excavations accelerated in the early 20th century under George Reisner from Harvard University. What researchers uncovered shocked historians. Beneath drifting desert sand stood the remains of temples, pyramids, colossal statues, ceremonial chambers, and underground structures linked to the Kingdom of Kush, one of Africa's most powerful ancient civilizations. At its peak around the 8th century BCE, Kushite rulers from this region conquered Egypt itself and became the 25th dynasty pharaohs. Yet many of the engineering methods visible at Jebel Barkal still remain poorly understood. The first mystery begins with the mountain itself. Rising roughly 100 meters above the desert plain, Jebel Barkal contains a narrow pinnacle of sandstone that resembles a rearing cobra when viewed from specific angles. To ancient Egyptians and Kushites, this cobra symbolized royal power and divine authority. What disturbs archaeologists is how many temples around the mountain appear intentionally positioned so this natural stone formation stands directly behind sacred structures during ritual approaches. Satellite mapping has shown repeated geometric orientation patterns centered around the pinnacle. Some researchers argue the mountain's shape alone inspired the sacred layout. Others believe sections of the pinnacle may have been deliberately modified by ancient stoneworkers to exaggerate the cobra-like silhouette. Weathering studies show uneven erosion rates across portions of the rock face, but there is still no consensus on whether human intervention played a role. Inside the mountain lies one of the greatest engineering puzzles in Nubian archaeology. Unlike freestanding Egyptian temples such as Karnak or Luxor, several chambers at Jebel Barkal were excavated directly into weak sandstone formations. Modern geological analysis classifies much of the local rock as highly vulnerable to cracking under thermal stress. In desert environments, sandstone expands during extreme daytime heat and contracts rapidly at night, producing internal fractures over centuries. Yet many chambers at Jebel Barkal survived for more than 2,000 years with portions of ceilings still intact. Engineers studying the site discovered something extraordinary. The ancient builders did not carve chambers symmetrically. Instead, support pillars vary in thickness depending on the stress patterns of surrounding rock layers. In some corridors, irregular spine columns were intentionally left behind to redistribute weight. This resembles principles used in modern adaptive rock stabilization inside mines and tunnels. According to structural comparisons conducted on Nubian temple excavations, several carved chambers display load distribution logic far more sophisticated than expected for the era. Researchers still debate how Kushite builders identified fracture zones without seismic equipment or geological instruments, but the most controversial mystery surrounds the pigments preserved inside the rock-cut sanctuaries. In multiple chambers, fragments of vivid mineral paint survived despite over 2 millennia of heat, sand abrasion, oxidation, and moisture fluctuation. Red ochre, Egyptian blue, yellow iron oxide, and carbon-based black pigments have all been identified. However, the durability of these colors exceeds expectations for such an unstable environment. Egyptian blue alone is already considered one of the most technologically advanced pigments of the ancient world. Created by heating silica, copper compounds, calcium, and alkali flux at temperatures approaching 850 to 1000 degrees Celsius, the pigment required controlled furnace conditions that many ancient societies could not consistently maintain. Yet at Jebel Barkal, researchers discovered pigment layering techniques different from many Egyptian temple sites further north. Microscopic analysis revealed ultra-thin protective surface films over some painted sections, possibly functioning as primitive antioxidation coatings. What makes this even stranger is comparative decay. Temples in parts of Upper Egypt with less severe desert exposure often show heavier pigment degradation than some chambers at Jebel Barkal. Certain wall sections retained measurable chromatic intensity after thousands of years of exposure to airborne quartz dust and thermal cycling. Laboratory examinations suggest organic binding agents may have been mixed with mineral pigments, but the exact composition has never been fully reconstructed. Some hypotheses propose plant gum, egg protein, beeswax, or acacia resin combinations. None have perfectly replicated the longevity observed on the original surfaces. The geometric precision of many paintings also raises questions. Several ceremonial reliefs contain repeating proportional grids, nearly identical over long distances, despite being painted on uneven sandstone walls. Modern measurements identified alignment deviations of only a few millimeters across sections extending multiple meters. Maintaining such consistency on fragile rock surfaces without laser guides or modern measuring systems would have required exceptional planning and execution. Then there is the astronomical alignment problem. Multiple temple entrances around Jebel Barkal appear oriented towards specific solar events. During certain periods of the year, sunlight penetrates narrow corridors and illuminates inner sanctuaries for only brief windows of time. Archaeoastronomers measuring these alignments found errors smaller than many medieval structures built more than 1,000 years later. Unlike the flat Giza Plateau, Jebel Barkal's terrain contains uneven elevations and obstructive rock formations, making accurate solar calibration considerably more difficult. Some researchers believe Kushite priests conducted long-term horizon observations over generations, tracking solar movement against fixed geological markers. Others suggest the site functioned partly as a ceremonial observatory integrated into state religion. Similar solar alignment systems exist at Abu Simbel in Egypt and Chaco Canyon in North America, but Jebel Barkal remains unusual because the alignments interact directly with a natural mountain formation already treated as sacred. Acoustics present another unexplained feature. Several interior chambers produce strong resonance effects even though they lack the large domes normally associated with sound amplification. tests inside narrow ceremonial corridors showed that low-frequency vocal tones can travel unusually far while remaining intelligible. In certain areas, a speaker position near the rear sanctuary can create echoes resembling multiple voices emerging simultaneously from stone walls. Archaeologists suspect the architecture intentionally enhanced priestly rituals, transforming ordinary speech into something perceived as supernatural. The engineering challenges become even more extreme when considering transportation and sculpture. Granite and sandstone statues discovered around Jebel Barkal include colossal royal figures weighing multiple tons. Some exhibit highly polished surfaces despite quartz-rich stone compositions capable of rapidly wearing down copper tools. Experimental archaeology projects attempting to reproduce similar polishing with reconstructed ancient equipment required enormous labor investments and still failed to fully replicate the smoothness visible on surviving fragments. Do you think the technology behind Jebel Barkal was truly understood by the ancient Kushites alone, or could part of that knowledge still be missing from history? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Olympus Ancient City is a ruined coastal city where ancient engineers built stone structures in one of the worst possible environments for long-term survival. A humid river valley exposed to earthquakes, mountain floods, and corrosive Mediterranean salt air. Yet parts of Olympus have remained standing for nearly 2,000 years. Located on the southern coast of modern-day Turkey, deep within the ancient Lycian region, Olympus sits between the Taurus Mountains and the Mediterranean Sea. The city was rediscovered by European travelers during the 19th century, after centuries of being swallowed by dense forest vegetation. Archaeological excavations later revealed Roman baths, temples, bridges, tombs, drainage systems, and massive defensive walls hidden beneath layers of roots, sediment, and collapsed stone. But the deeper researchers studied Olympus, the stranger the city became. Unlike most ancient Mediterranean settlements built on dry, elevated terrain, Olympus was constructed directly inside a humid river valley. The city is split in half by a river flowing toward the sea, while seasonal floods descend from the Taurus Mountains above. Modern engineers consider such terrain highly unstable for long-term stone construction. Moisture weakens foundations. Salt crystallization breaks masonry apart. Floodwater erodes retaining walls. Yet, many structures in Olympus survived not for centuries but for millennia. One of the first mysteries involves the city's underground drainage system. Excavations revealed stone-lined water channels running beneath several buildings and roads. The channels were constructed with extremely subtle gradients that allowed water to flow continuously without damaging foundations. Even a slight miscalculation would have caused stagnation or erosion. Modern hydraulic engineers note that ancient drainage systems often failed over long periods because of poor slope control, but parts of Olympus still function naturally after nearly 2,000 years of environmental exposure. Researchers also discovered evidence suggesting the ancient inhabitants may have altered the river itself. Geological surveys indicate that the present river course may not perfectly match its ancient flow pattern. Stone reinforcements along the banks, buried retaining structures, and artificial embankments imply that the inhabitants engineered flood defenses or redirected portions of the river. This is particularly shocking because the city endured repeated seismic activity throughout antiquity. Southern Anatolia sits near active fault systems, and earthquakes frequently damaged ancient coastal settlements across the eastern Mediterranean. Entire cities disappeared under similar conditions. Olympus somehow adapted. The precision of its stonework creates another unresolved puzzle. Surrounding the city are Lycian rock-cut tombs carved directly into steep cliff faces. Some surfaces appear remarkably flat and symmetrical despite being cut into hard limestone on unstable slopes. the cuts display consistency that researchers normally associate with more advanced quarrying traditions. Historians believe Lycian builders primarily used iron chisels and manual hammering techniques, yet certain cuts resemble controlled geometric shaping rather than rough extraction. Even more mysterious is the placement of many tombs themselves. Several were carved high above the valley floor in locations that remain difficult to access even today. Archaeologists still debate how workers transported tools, scaffolding materials, and construction supplies onto those vertical rock faces. Some tomb chambers contain internal symmetry that would have required careful measurements under dangerous conditions without modern surveying instruments. But perhaps the greatest mystery of Olympus lies in its construction materials. Ancient coastal cities usually deteriorate rapidly because salt air destroys mortar from within. Salt crystals penetrate microscopic pores, expand during humidity cycles, and slowly fracture stone and cement apart. Modern concrete near coastlines often suffers severe degradation within decades, if not continuously maintained. Yet portions of Olympus still retain structural cohesion after nearly 2,000 years beside the Mediterranean Sea. This has led researchers to investigate the composition of the city's mortar. Laboratory studies on Roman maritime concrete from other Mediterranean sites have revealed surprisingly advanced chemical behavior. In places like Portus Cusanus and Caesarea Maritima, ancient Roman builders mixed volcanic ash rich in pozzolanic minerals with lime and seawater. Over time, chemical reactions formed rare crystalline minerals such as aluminum tobermorite, which actually strengthened the concrete instead of weakening it. Some Roman harbour structures have survived for more than 2,000 years underwater, far longer than many modern marine concretes. But Olympus presents a problem. The region around Olympus does not contain the same massive volcanic ash sources found near Rome or Naples. Yet some surviving mortar sections show unusual resistance to moisture and salt penetration. Researchers suspect local builders may have developed alternative mixtures using crushed ceramics, mineral-rich sands, limestone compounds, or unknown additives that mimicked pozzolanic reactions. Some mortar fragments appear denser than expected under microscopic examination, with lower porosity than typical regional construction materials. No consensus exists on the exact formula. What makes the mystery even stranger is the environmental context. Olympus experiences heavy humidity, biological growth, and intense temperature fluctuations between seasons. Moss, roots, groundwater, and salt exposure should have accelerated decay dramatically. Instead, certain walls remain locked together with surprising stability. In some areas, the mortar has outlasted the stones themselves. Modern restoration teams working in Mediterranean archaeology have repeatedly encountered a disturbing pattern. Ancient mortars sometimes perform better over centuries than modern equivalents designed using industrial cement. Portland cement, invented in the 19th century, often develops cracking under marine conditions because trapped salts expand internally. Ancient Roman-style binders, by contrast, sometimes become chemically stronger through interaction with seawater. This raises uncomfortable questions. Did ancient builders possess a practical understanding of long-term mineral chemistry that modern civilizations partially lost? Or did centuries of trial and error accidentally produce material combinations modern science is only beginning to understand? The mystery extends beyond mortar. Near Olympus lies the phenomenon known as the eternal flames of Chimera. Natural methane gas escapes through cracks in the mountainside and burns continuously, in some cases for thousands of years. Ancient Greeks associated the flames with the mythical monster Chimera, but geologists now understand the fires are caused by hydrocarbon seepage from underground geological activity. What fascinates archaeologists is that the ancient inhabitants of Olympus appeared fully aware of the dangerous terrain surrounding them. construction patterns suggest they deliberately avoided unstable gas emission zones and landslide-prone areas. Without modern geology, they somehow identified regions safe enough for large-scale construction while building within an active tectonic landscape. Recent LIDAR surveys and vegetation-penetrating mapping technologies have added another layer to the mystery. Beneath the forest canopy, researchers identified traces of buried roads, terraces, water systems, and collapsed foundations extending far beyond the visible ruins. Some archaeologists now suspect that the excavated sections represent only a fraction of the original city. If true, Olympus may have been far larger and technologically more sophisticated than previously believed. Olympus once served as a stronghold for Cilician pirates before being captured by the Romans in the 1st century BCE. But unlike a temporary military base, the city displayed remarkably advanced planning, efficiently combining sea access, river transport, natural defences and internal infrastructure. That contradiction continues to puzzle historians. Pirate strongholds rarely possessed engineering systems and long-term urban planning as sophisticated as Olympus, a city seemingly designed to survive within the harsh coastal environment of the Mediterranean. Do you think Olympus was simply an ancient coastal city, or the remains of a civilization whose engineering knowledge was far more advanced than historians currently believe? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Modern-day Iraq still hides the ruins of Dur Kurgalzu beneath the desert, the remains of what may have been one of the most technologically advanced cities of the Bronze Age. Built more than 3,300 years ago by the Kassite kings of Babylon, the city contains a massive ziggurat, enormous palaces, advanced hydraulic systems, and one mystery that still confuses engineers today. How could a Bronze Age civilization create buildings that may have naturally cooled themselves in temperatures exceeding 45 degrees Celsius? The ruins were first identified in the 19th century, but major excavations began during the 1940s under Iraqi archaeologist Taha Bakir. Beneath layers of sand and collapsed mud brick, researchers uncovered a planned royal city covering several square kilometers, including temples, courtyards, canals, administrative halls, and one of the largest surviving ziggurats in Mesopotamia. What shocked archaeologists was not only the scale of the city, but the sophistication hidden inside structures built almost entirely from mud brick. Dur Kurgalzu was founded during the 14th century BCE by King Kurigalzu I of the Kassite dynasty. At the time, Mesopotamia was already crowded with powerful cities such as Babylon, Nippur, and Ur. Yet the Kassites chose to construct an entirely new royal capital on unstable alluvial soil beside the Tigris River. Modern engineers know how dangerous this environment is. The ground in central Mesopotamia is soft, water-rich, and highly vulnerable to subsidence. Heavy structures slowly sink, crack, or tilt over time. Even today, maintaining stability in these conditions requires reinforced foundations and constant monitoring. And yet the core of Dur Kurgalzu's ziggurat still stands after more than 33 centuries. The surviving tower rises roughly 57 meters high. Estimates suggest it originally required millions of mud bricks, each weighing several kilograms. The total mass may have exceeded tens of thousands of tons. Despite this, the structure avoided catastrophic collapse for longer than many medieval stone fortresses. Excavations revealed something unexpected hidden between the brick layers, thick reed mats combined with natural bitumen. Researchers believe these layers acted like ancient shock absorbers, distributing pressure while reducing cracking caused by thermal expansion and ground movement. In modern architecture, similar principles are used in composite engineering materials. The idea that Bronze Age builders may have understood stress distribution at this level remains deeply controversial. Among all the unanswered questions surrounding Dur Kurgalzu, None may be more fascinating than the palace ventilation system. Summer temperatures in Iraq regularly exceed 40 degrees Celsius. In exposed mud brick cities, indoor heat can become lethal, but archaeologists studying the royal palace noticed unusually thick walls, narrow corridors, elevated vents, internal courtyards, and carefully aligned openings facing prevailing winds. At first, these features appeared purely architectural. Later studies suggested something much more advanced. Researchers proposed that the Kassites may have unintentionally or intentionally created a passive cooling system capable of lowering indoor temperatures without mechanical technology. The walls of some palace sections were several meters thick. Mud brick has high thermal mass, meaning it absorbs heat slowly during the day and releases it gradually at night. Combined with shaded courtyards, this could stabilize internal temperatures significantly, but the real mystery lies in airflow. Certain corridors appear positioned to accelerate wind movement through pressure differences. Modern engineers compare this effect to the Venturi principle, where air speeds up when forced through narrower passages. Computer simulations performed on similar Mesopotamian structures suggest interior temperatures could potentially remain 6 to 10 degrees Celsius cooler than exterior environments. That difference is enormous. In a desert climate of 45 degrees, reducing indoor temperatures even by 5 degrees dramatically increases survivability and comfort. Such optimization would require careful understanding of solar orientation, seasonal winds, thermal retention, air pressure movement, and urban airflow patterns. Some researchers compare aspects of these systems to traditional Persian wind catchers developed many centuries later. Others argue Kurgalzu may represent one of the earliest large-scale examples of climate-responsive architecture ever discovered. The most unsettling part is that many of these features were integrated into a palace built over 3,000 years before modern air conditioning. Unlike many ancient cities that expanded chaotically over centuries, Kurgalzu appears unusually organized. Satellite surveys and excavation maps reveal carefully planned districts, including ceremonial sectors, administrative compounds, residential zones, storage complexes, and defensive boundaries. Road alignments show consistent directional logic. Some structures appear positioned to maximize shade while minimizing heat exposure during peak daylight hours. Researchers also noted that elevated sections of the city were strategically located above flood-prone terrain. This was critical because Mesopotamian rivers could shift unpredictably, destroying settlements within decades. Yet Kurgalzu survived for centuries. The city's orientation may also contain astronomical elements. Several ceremonial structures align closely with cardinal directions, suggesting systematic surveying methods. Without magnetic compasses or modern instruments, Kassite planners likely relied on solar shadows and stellar observations for large-scale alignment. The accuracy achieved across such a large urban area continues to surprise archaeologists. No Mesopotamian city could survive without water control, and Kurgalzu may have possessed one of the most sophisticated hydraulic systems of its era. Excavations uncovered large canals connected to the Tigris, drainage channels, storage basins, elevated water routes, and possible underground runoff systems. Maintaining water flow across flat terrain is extremely difficult. Even tiny gradient errors can stop movement entirely or cause destructive flooding. Modern hydraulic engineers calculate slope differences with laser equipment. Kassite builders achieved workable water distribution using observation, manual measurement, and labor alone. Some historians believe the city's survival depended on constant management of irrigation and drainage networks. If true, Kurgalzu functioned less like a static settlement and more like a continuously maintained environmental machine. Constructing Kurgalzu required extraordinary organization. A single large mud brick structure could consume hundreds of thousands of bricks. Each brick had to be mixed, moulded, dried, transported, lifted, and placed with precision. The ziggurat alone likely required labour on an industrial scale, and unlike Egypt, Mesopotamia lacked abundant building stone nearby. Most construction depended on mud brick, one of the most fragile major building materials in history. This means the Kassites achieved monumental durability using one of the weakest materials available. Some scholars compare the logistical complexity of Dur Kurugulzu to large Egyptian royal projects of the New Kingdom. Yet the Kassites receive only a fraction of the historical attention. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not how Dur Kurugulzu was built, but why it disappeared. At its peak, the city represented political power, engineering sophistication, and royal authority. Then, over time, it declined and was gradually abandoned. Possible explanations include river migration, environmental collapse, invasion, trade disruption, or failure of the hydraulic infrastructure. But no single theory fully explains the city's disappearance. The irony is difficult to ignore. A civilization advanced enough to stabilize giant mud brick monuments, manipulate airflow for cooling, and engineer water systems across unstable terrain ultimately vanished into silence. What do you think really caused the fall of Dur Kurugulzu? Climate collapse, war, or the failure of its advanced water systems? Share your theory in the comments below. In northern Iraq, near modern Khorsabad, Dusharaqin was built in less than 2 decades as a colossal artificial capital for King Sargon II, a city whose engineering scale still challenges modern understanding. The ruins were identified in 1843 by French archaeologist Paul-Émile Botta, who uncovered gigantic winged statues buried beneath the desert and accidentally revealed one of the greatest lost cities of the Assyrian Empire. Most ancient cities evolved gradually over centuries. Dur-Sharrukin did not. It appeared almost all at once. Construction began around 717 BCE under Sargon II, ruler of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Historical inscriptions claim the king ordered an entirely new capital to be built from barren land. By approximately 706 BCE, major sections of the city were already functioning. That means one of the largest urban projects of the ancient world was largely completed in barely more than a decade. The scale was staggering. Archaeologists estimate the city covered nearly 3 square kilometers, enclosed by walls stretching over 16 kilometers in perimeter. The fortifications contained more than 150 defensive towers. Inside stood royal palaces, temples, ceremonial courts, administrative buildings, gardens, and massive gateways guarded by colossal stone beings known as lamassu. The most shocking aspect is the logistics. Millions of mud bricks had to be manufactured, dried, transported, and assembled in coordinated phases. Some estimates suggest that several thousand labourers would have needed to work simultaneously for years without interruption. Unlike Egyptian pyramids built over generations, Dur-Sharrukin compressed enormous architectural activity into an extremely short time frame. Even modern historians remain uncertain how the Assyrians organised labour at such industrial scale without cranes, mechanised transport, or modern surveying systems. Some scholars compare the project to the rapid construction campaigns of Imperial Rome centuries later. Others argue the Assyrians may have possessed one of the most sophisticated state management systems in the ancient world, effectively an early form of centralised industrial planning. The entrances of Dur-Sharrukin were protected by giant lamassu statues, hybrid creatures with human heads, wings of eagles, and bodies of bulls or lions. Some stood over 4 meters tall and weighed between 30 and 40 tons. The statues were carved from single blocks of alabaster extracted from distant quarries. Transporting them alone would have been an immense engineering challenge. Ancient Assyrian reliefs depict workers dragging colossal statues on sledges, using ropes while water was poured beneath to reduce friction. Experiments by engineers suggest such methods are theoretically possible, but controlling balance and preventing fractures in stones weighing dozens of tons remains extraordinarily difficult. Some lamassu were installed with astonishing precision inside gateways where clearances were extremely narrow. Even a small misalignment could have shattered the sculpture or damaged the walls. Comparisons are often made with the stone transport mysteries of Baalbek and the Moai statues of Easter Island. Yet Dur Sharukin differs because these sculptures were not isolated monuments. They were integrated into a highly organized urban mega-project, completed in remarkably little time. Some archaeologists believe the Assyrians may have used advanced knowledge of leverage systems, lubrication techniques, and coordinated manpower beyond what historians once assumed possible for the 8th century BCE. The greatest mystery of Dur Sharukin may not be its statues or walls, but its mathematical organization. Unlike ancient settlements that expanded chaotically over centuries, Dur Sharukin appears to have been designed according to a master plan from the very beginning. Satellite analysis and archaeological mapping revealed geometric consistency across large sections of the city. Gates aligned strategically with roads and ceremonial axes. Administrative sectors were separated from sacred districts with unusual spatial discipline. The royal palace stood elevated on a massive artificial terrace overlooking the city, like a carefully calculated command center. What astonishes researchers is the level of precision achieved without modern instruments. Some walls maintain directional consistency across distances exceeding several kilometers with surprisingly low deviation. Archaeologists studying Assyrian construction methods believe surveyors may have used standardized measurement cords, astronomical observations, and modular mathematical ratios, but the true accuracy remains difficult to explain. Modern engineers note that maintaining straight alignments over large desert surfaces is extremely challenging even with contemporary optical tools. Tiny angular errors accumulate rapidly across long distances, yet many sections of Dur Sharukin exhibit remarkable consistency. Researchers have compared the city's planning sophistication to Roman military urbanism, Persian imperial engineering, and even later Islamic geometric city planning. What makes the mystery deeper is the time frame. Dur Sharukin predates many famous examples of highly structured urban planning by centuries. Some historians argue that Neo-Assyrian architects possessed an advanced applied mathematics tradition now mostly lost. Others believe the empire's surveying techniques were simply far more refined than surviving records suggest. The city almost feels less like an Iron Age settlement and more like a carefully engineered machine. The palace walls of Dur Sharukin were covered in kilometers of stone reliefs depicting warfare, engineering operations, royal ceremonies, hunting scenes, and military campaigns. The detail is extraordinary. Muscle anatomy, textile folds, hair patterns, weapon engravings, and even individual facial expressions were carved with remarkable consistency. Certain relief lines are so clean and deep that some modern researchers question whether ordinary iron chisels alone could maintain such precision over massive surfaces. Microscopic examinations show evidence of repeated polishing and controlled carving angles. Some art historians suggest Assyrian craftsmen used advanced proportional grid systems comparable to methods later perfected in classical Greece. The reliefs also provide rare technical documentation. One famous panel appears to show the transport of colossal statues, including rope systems, support beams, lubrication methods, and synchronized labor teams. These carvings are not merely decorative. They may preserve engineering knowledge visually encoded into imperial propaganda. In some sections, the stone surfaces remain surprisingly preserved despite nearly 3,000 years of erosion, conflict, and exposure. That durability itself remains another mystery. Dush-Sharukin existed in a region where controlling water meant controlling survival. Archaeological evidence suggests the Assyrians constructed canals, reservoirs, drainage systems, and water distribution networks capable of supporting thousands of inhabitants inside an artificial capital. The Neo-Assyrian Empire became famous for hydraulic engineering. Under Sargon II and later Sennacherib, massive canal systems redirected water across difficult terrain. Some channels maintained gradients so precise that modern engineers remain impressed by the minimal deviation over long distances. One Assyrian aqueduct at Jawan, constructed decades after Dur-Sharukin, used millions of shaped stones and waterproof mortar technologies centuries before similar Roman systems became famous. This raises an important question. If the Assyrians achieved such hydraulic sophistication this early, how much technical knowledge has been lost? Some comparisons place Assyrian water engineering alongside Roman aqueduct systems, Persian qanats, and Nabatean hydraulic networks at Petra. Yet many Assyrian innovations appeared earlier than all of them. Then came the strangest part of all. In 705 BCE, Sargon II died during military campaigns, and soon after, the imperial capital was moved from Dur-Sharukin to Nineveh. The city had barely begun its existence before being almost completely abandoned. Some scholars believe Sargon's death was seen as a divine curse, while others point to political instability. What makes the mystery so unsettling is that an enormous megacity, built with massive resources, was abandoned within only a few years. Today, the ruins remain a frozen symbol of Assyrian ambition, a city whose engineering and organization still seem far ahead of its time. Do you think Dur-Sharukin was abandoned because of superstition and fear after Sargon II's death? Or was there a deeper political reason hidden behind the collapse of this massive ancient megacity? Share your thoughts in the comments below. In the marshlands of southern Iraq, near the ancient city of Ur, Tel Al-Ubaid preserves traces of a society that may have mastered engineering, water control, and geometric design nearly 7,000 years ago, long before the rise of the first true empires. The site was first excavated in the early 20th century by British archaeologists investigating the origins of Sumerian civilization. Beneath layers of Mesopotamian ruins, they uncovered something older, an advanced pre-Sumerian culture now known as the Ubaid civilization, dating roughly between 5,500 and 4,000 BCE. At first, the discoveries seemed simple: mud brick walls, pottery fragments, primitive tools. But the deeper researchers looked, the stranger the site became. The settlement showed evidence of organized architecture, hydraulic planning, standardized craftsmanship, and long-distance trade at a time when much of humanity was still living in scattered farming villages. Tel Al-Ubaid did not look like the beginning of civilization. It looked like civilization had already begun long before historians expected. The most immediate mystery surrounding Tel Al-Ubaid is its architecture. The region experiences brutal environmental conditions, temperatures exceeding 45 degrees Celsius, seasonal flooding, salt-rich soil, and centuries of erosion. Yet parts of the settlement survived for millennia despite being built largely from mud brick and reed material. Modern engineers studying ancient Mesopotamian bricks discovered that Ubaid builders may have used carefully balanced mixtures of clay, silt, sand, and organic fibers to reduce cracking during drying. Some bricks also appear to have been arranged in alternating moisture-resistant patterns similar to later Sumerian construction methods. This is astonishing because such techniques require understanding structural stress, evaporation rates, and load distribution. Comparable architectural planning would not appear in many other regions for thousands of years. Even more surprising is the consistency. Excavations revealed bricks of highly uniform dimensions, suggesting the use of standardized molds or measurement systems. For a society often described as prehistoric, the precision is difficult to explain. Researchers comparing Ubaid construction to early Neolithic settlements in Europe found Tel al-Ubaid significantly more advanced in urban planning. Some archaeologists argue the site represents one of humanity's first experiments in engineered settlement design, rather than simple village growth. Southern Mesopotamia was never an easy environment to inhabit. Ancient river channels shifted constantly, marshlands flooded unpredictably, and salt accumulation could destroy farmland within decades. Yet the people of Tel al-Ubaid managed to establish stable settlements in one of the most difficult landscapes on Earth. Geological surveys suggest they modified waterways and possibly created primitive irrigation systems centuries before the large canal networks of Sumer. Sediment analysis indicates controlled water flow around habitation zones, implying intentional hydraulic management. This raises an enormous question. How could a civilization this early understand hydrology so well? To manage water successfully in southern Mesopotamia, builders needed to calculate gradients with remarkable accuracy. A canal sloping too steeply would erode rapidly, too shallow, and water would stagnate. Modern irrigation engineers note that even minor elevation differences dramatically affect water behavior over long distances. Yet evidence from Ubaid settlements suggests they already understood these principles thousands of years before formal mathematics emerged in written form. Some historians now believe the technological foundation of Sumerian civilization did not appear suddenly. Instead, it may have evolved from earlier experimental societies like Tel al-Ubaid, whose knowledge has largely vanished beneath Mesopotamia's thick sediment layers. One of the most controversial discoveries at Tel al-Ubaid is the temple platform structure uncovered beneath later ruins. The building featured symmetrical planning, elevated foundations, ceremonial spaces, and clear directional organization. This is deeply significant because monumental religious architecture usually appears after urban civilization develops. But Tel al-Ubaid challenges that sequence entirely. The temple predates many recognized city-states by centuries. In other words, sophisticated ceremonial architecture may have existed before true cities themselves. Archaeologists also noticed that the structure used layered foundations designed to stabilize weight in unstable marshy terrain. Similar engineering concepts would later appear in ziggurat construction throughout Mesopotamia. The implication is disturbing to traditional timelines. Some of the engineering principles associated with advanced Sumerian architecture may have originated far earlier than expected. Instead of civilization evolving gradually from primitive villages, Tel al-Ubaid hints that surprisingly advanced knowledge may already have existed during humanity's earliest urban experiments. Among the site's strangest artifacts are the famous Ubaid figurines. Small humanoid statues with elongated skulls, almond-shaped eyes, and reptile-like facial features. The figures are unlike most prehistoric art found elsewhere in the world. They appear highly stylized yet surprisingly standardized, suggesting symbolic meaning rather than random artistic experimentation. Some figurines depict female forms holding infants. Others appear ceremonial or priest-like. Their exact purpose remains unknown. Mainstream archaeologists interpret them as representations of deities, fertility symbols, or mythological beings. However, the unusual appearance of the statues has fueled decades of speculation because no fully accepted explanation exists for why the Ubaid people consistently portrayed human figures in this manner. More importantly, the craftsmanship reveals advanced ceramic control. Creating such thin, symmetrical shapes without collapse requires careful firing temperatures and clay preparation. Experiments conducted by modern ceramic specialists attempting to recreate Ubaid figurines found that maintaining stability during firing is surprisingly difficult without extensive practical knowledge. This suggests Ubaid artisans possessed generations of accumulated ceramic expertise long before the earliest known written technical traditions. The greatest technological mystery of Tel al-Ubaid may be its pottery. Ubaid ceramics are among the oldest highly decorated pottery traditions ever discovered, yet many pieces display geometric precision that appears far beyond what researchers expected from the 5th millennium BCE. Bowls and jars were painted entirely by hand using repeating triangles, parallel bands, wave patterns, and radial symmetry that remain astonishingly accurate across curved surfaces. Some designs maintain near-perfect spacing around complete circumferences despite the absence of modern measuring tools or rotational guides. Researchers analysing the pottery discovered that many vessels follow proportional ratios with extremely low deviation. Certain painted bands vary by only a few millimeters across entire containers. On rounded pottery surfaces, maintaining that consistency manually is extraordinarily difficult. Modern ceramic artists attempting to reproduce similar patterns without guides often fail to achieve the same symmetry. This has led some experts to suspect the Ubaid culture may have used unknown alignment techniques, rotational supports, or measurement methods that left little archaeological evidence behind. Even the firing process remains partly mysterious. Many vessels exhibit highly controlled coloration, meaning kiln temperatures were relatively stable during production. But stable firing requires airflow management and fuel regulation that should have been difficult with primitive technology. Comparisons with pottery from other Neolithic cultures reveal the difference clearly. While many early farming societies produced rough utilitarian ceramics, Ubaid pottery often appears mathematically intentional. The precision becomes even more unsettling considering the age of the artifacts. Some pieces were created nearly 2,000 years before the Great Pyramid of Giza. In practical terms, the people of Tel al-Ubaid were already producing geometrically sophisticated ceramic art at a time when much of humanity had barely begun permanent settlement life. Artifacts found at Tel al-Ubaid contain materials traced to the Arabian Gulf and the Iranian Plateau, proving that long-distance trade already existed nearly 7,000 years ago. Obsidian, rare stones and marine shells travelled across dangerous deserts and waterways long before organised empires emerged. Some researchers believe the Ubaid people may even have used primitive boats along Gulf coastlines, suggesting maritime trade began far earlier than historians once believed. Do you think Tel al-Ubaid was truly the beginning of civilization? Or evidence that an even older advanced culture existed before recorded history? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tel Barsip stood beside the Euphrates River in northern Syria and became one of the strangest cities of the ancient Near East. Beneath layers of desert dust and collapsed mud brick walls, archaeologists uncovered murals whose colours survived nearly 3,000 years under extreme heat, seasonal flooding, and war. Some pigments remained more stable than paints used in parts of medieval Europe over 2 millennia later, but the paintings were only the beginning. Hidden beneath Tel Barsip was evidence of hydraulic engineering, seismic-resistant foundations, underground chambers, and logistical systems that seemed impossibly advanced for an Iron Age frontier city. Tel Barsi, now known as Tel Amar, was rediscovered near the Euphrates River close to the modern Syria-Turkey border. During French excavations in the 1920s led by François Thiroux d'Angin, archaeologists uncovered palace complexes, defensive walls, and some of the best-preserved Assyrian murals ever found. Inscriptions revealed the city was once an Aramean kingdom before being conquered by Shalmaneser III around 856 BCE and renamed Kar Shalmaneser. What surprised historians most was its sophistication. Despite being only a frontier city, Tel Barsip possessed infrastructure and urban planning comparable to major Mesopotamian capitals like Nineveh and Babylon. The first major mystery surrounding Tel Barsip involves its architecture. Most of the city was built using mud brick, one of the weakest construction materials in the ancient world. Standard mud brick structures exposed to water erosion typically deteriorate within decades without constant maintenance. Yet large portions of Tel Barsip survived for centuries. Excavations revealed that builders used multi-layered foundation systems beneath major structures. Instead of placing walls directly onto compact soil, they created stacked layers of crushed stone, hardened clay, and differently compressed sediments. Modern engineers studying ancient earthquake mitigation techniques noted similarities between these foundations and primitive seismic dampening systems. The region surrounding the Euphrates experiences periodic flooding and unstable soil movement. Even minor foundation shifts can destroy mud brick architecture. However, some palace walls at Tel Barsip remained standing long enough for multiple reconstruction phases over centuries. Researchers also discovered slight angular inclinations built into drainage corridors. Certain streets were tilted by fractions of a degree to redirect runoff water away from critical foundations. Similar hydrological planning principles appear in Roman cities nearly 700 years later. The precision is difficult to explain using the tools traditionally associated with Iron Age societies. There is no evidence of advanced surveying instruments, yet the alignment consistency across large structures suggests sophisticated measurement techniques. Some archaeologists believe the builders may have used water-level calibration systems similar to primitive hydraulic leveling tools. Others suggest astronomical shadow measurements were used to maintain alignment consistency across large construction projects. Whatever method they used, Tel Barsip demonstrates a level of engineering planning far beyond the simplistic image often associated with ancient frontier settlements. The most disturbing mystery at Tel Barsip lies inside its murals. When archaeologists uncovered the palace paintings, they expected to find faded traces of colour similar to those seen at most ancient Near Eastern sites. Instead, they discovered vivid reds, blacks, whites, and blues that had survived nearly 3 millennia. This should not have been possible. The murals existed in an environment where summer temperatures regularly exceeded 40 degrees Celsius. Seasonal humidity changes caused repeated expansion and contraction of mud brick walls. Over centuries, the site endured floods, invasions, fires, and structural collapse. Yet many pigments remained chemically stable. Laboratory analysis revealed that several pigments were produced from finely ground mineral compounds, mixed with organic binders whose exact composition is still debated today. Microscopic studies showed that some paint layers were extraordinarily thin and applied in multiple stages, creating optical depth similar to techniques used in Renaissance glazing thousands of years later. The blue pigments became especially controversial among researchers. In many ancient civilizations, stable blue pigments were difficult to manufacture. Egyptian blue, one of the earliest synthetic pigments in history, required heating silica, copper compounds, lime, and alkali at temperatures approaching 850 to 1000 degrees Celsius. Some pigment fragments at Tel Barsip appear to share characteristics with high-temperature mineral processing traditions, suggesting the Assyrians either imported advanced pigment technologies or possessed their own specialized production methods. Even more mysterious is the adhesion quality of the paint. Modern conservation teams found that some pigments bonded unusually well to plaster surfaces despite centuries of environmental stress. Certain wall sections displayed less flaking than medieval frescoes only a fraction of their age. This suggests the use of carefully prepared binding agents, possibly involving plant gums, proteins, or mineral stabilizers that are still not fully identified. The layering technique itself was remarkably advanced. Instead of applying thick coats, artists built color through multiple translucent layers. This reduced cracking while increasing durability and light reflection. Similar principles are used in modern industrial coatings designed to resist thermal stress. Some researchers compared the preservation quality of Tilbarsip's murals to fragments from Pompeii, buried under volcanic ash for nearly 2,000 years. But unlike Pompeii, Tilbarsip had no protective ash layer sealing its walls from oxygen and moisture. Its pigments survived, exposed to open environmental degradation. This raises an uncomfortable possibility. Certain ancient pigment processing techniques may have been partially lost over time. The murals also contained unusually consistent geometric proportions. Human figures, animal forms, and symbolic patterns were painted according to rigid spatial systems that indicate mathematical planning beneath the artwork itself. Some panels maintain proportional consistency across several meters, with deviations smaller than what would normally be expected from freehand painting. That level of control implies the use of grid systems or pre-measurement frameworks that archaeologists still do not completely understand. The more scientists study the murals of Tilbarsip, the harder it becomes to dismiss them as merely decorative art. They appear to represent a fusion of chemistry, engineering, mathematics, and visual design operating at a level centuries ahead of what historians once expected from Assyrian frontier cities. Tilbarsip's survival depended entirely on water management. Although positioned beside the Euphrates River, the city itself sat on elevated terrain vulnerable to seasonal fluctuations. Delivering controlled water flow across the settlement required precise gradient management. Archaeologists uncovered canals and drainage channels with remarkably stable slopes maintained over long distances. In hydraulic engineering, even tiny elevation miscalculations can produce overflow, stagnation, or destructive erosion. Yet the Tilbarsip channels maintained controlled flow efficiency using only gravity. Some narrow canal sections appear intentionally compressed before expanding into wider basins, a principle resembling modern pressure regulation systems. Engineers studying the site suggested that Assyrian planners understood practical hydraulic behavior at a surprisingly advanced level, even without formal fluid mechanics. Comparisons have been made to later Roman aqueduct systems, but Tilbarsip predates many of those engineering achievements by centuries. Geophysical surveys at Tilbarsip revealed hidden voids and tunnels beneath the ancient city. Some corridors align precisely with structures above ground, suggesting they were part of a planned underground system rather than random excavations. Their purpose remains unclear. Researchers believe they may have served as escape routes, underground water storage, or ritual passages connected to palace complexes. Because large sections remain inaccessible due to instability and conflict in Syria, much of Tilbarsip may still be buried beneath the surface. What do you think ancient builders at Tilbarsip truly understood about engineering and materials thousands of years ago? Let us know your theory in the comments below. The ruins of Castra Mytia in modern-day Romania look like the remains of an ordinary Roman frontier fort. But beneath the collapsed stone walls and buried foundations lies evidence of engineering that should not have existed on the edge of the Roman Empire nearly 2,000 years ago. Archaeologists discovered signs of industrial-scale metallurgy, precision water systems, unusually durable construction materials, and furnaces capable of temperatures that still puzzle modern researchers. Castra Mytia was supposed to be a military outpost. Instead, it may have been one of the most technologically advanced industrial centers in ancient Europe. The site was first systematically identified during 19th century excavations in Transylvania, when Roman bricks, military inscriptions, coins, and structural remains began emerging from farmland near Vertel. Archaeologists soon realized the settlement was far larger than a standard auxiliary fort. Spread across more than 20 hectares, the complex included military barracks, civilian housing, baths, workshops, temples, warehouses, and extensive production zones. What shocked researchers most was not the size of the settlement, but the technological sophistication hidden inside it. Roman forts along frontier regions were usually designed for defense and logistics. Castramitia appears to have functioned more like a hybrid between a military base and an industrial city. Excavations uncovered massive quantities of iron slag, furnace debris, casting fragments, and evidence of continuous metal production on a scale rarely seen in Roman Dacia. Some estimates suggest thousands of tons of raw material may have been processed here over several centuries. For comparison, many smaller Roman forts across Britain and Germania show only localized blacksmithing activity, intended for repairing weapons and tools. Castramitia was operating at an entirely different level. The greatest mystery surrounds the furnaces themselves. Fragments of furnace walls recovered from the site show signs of exposure to temperatures exceeding 1,100 degrees Celsius. Some thermal analysis suggests portions may even have approached 1,200 degrees under peak conditions. Achieving such heat in the 2nd century AD would already have required extremely efficient airflow systems, carefully controlled fuel ratios, and advanced furnace geometry. Yet Castramitia was not located in Rome, Alexandria, or Antioch. It stood on the distant northern frontier of the empire. Researchers studying reconstructed Roman furnaces found that simple charcoal combustion alone would struggle to maintain temperatures high enough for prolonged large-scale smelting without carefully engineered draft systems. At Castramitia, archaeologists discovered evidence suggesting the furnaces may have used natural air acceleration through specially angled ventilation channels. Some reconstructions indicate that the internal structure created a primitive pressure differential effect, increasing oxygen flow automatically as temperature rose. In modern engineering terms, the furnaces may have functioned using principles similar to passive forced air combustion systems. This raises an uncomfortable question for historians. Were Roman metallurgists merely experimenting through trial and error, or did they possess a deeper practical understanding of thermodynamics than previously assumed? The mystery becomes even stranger when compared to medieval Europe. Blast furnace technology capable of sustaining very high temperatures did not become widespread in many parts of Europe until nearly 1,000 years later. Yet the metallurgical remains at Castramitia suggest the Romans had already developed surprisingly sophisticated thermal control methods. Some metallurgical analyses of slag samples even indicate unusually efficient extraction rates, meaning less metal was wasted during smelting than expected for ancient systems. Fuel consumption presents another puzzle. Producing temperatures above 1,100 degrees Celsius would have required enormous amounts of charcoal. Researchers estimate that ancient iron production often consumed several kilograms of wood for every kilogram of usable iron. Maintaining industrial production at Castramitia for decades would have demanded vast resource management systems, organized forestry operations, and stable transportation networks. This suggests the settlement was connected to a far larger economic infrastructure than historians once believed. But metallurgy was only part of the anomaly. Beneath the ruins lies evidence of a highly organized hydraulic network. Archaeologists identified drainage systems, underground channels, storage basins, and carefully graded water routes engineered with remarkable precision. Some channels maintained slope variations so small that modern surveyors were surprised they could have been measured accurately using ancient tools. Similar precision is visible in famous Roman aqueducts such as Pont du Gard in France, where gradients were controlled to fractions of a degree across long distances. At Castramitia, this level of engineering appeared inside a frontier settlement. Water management was critical because industrial furnaces required cooling systems, washing stations, and steady water access for both metallurgy and daily military operations. Some researchers believe the hydraulic systems at Castramiscia were designed not only for sanitation but also to support continuous industrial activity. If true, the settlement may have operated as a fully integrated military-industrial complex centuries before the concept officially existed. The construction materials create another unresolved mystery. Many walls and foundations at Castramiscia survived despite severe freeze-thaw cycles, moisture exposure, and nearly 2 millennia of erosion. Analysis of mortar samples revealed mineral reactions similar to those found in durable Roman marine concrete, used in Mediterranean harbours. In several Roman coastal structures, researchers discovered that volcanic ash mixed with lime produced crystalline formations called aluminous tobermorite over time, strengthening the concrete instead of weakening it. Some scientists believe similar long-term chemical reactions may explain the unusual durability of structures at Castramiscia. The problem is geographic. Romania is far from the volcanic regions of Italy traditionally associated with Roman pozzolanic concrete. Either the Romans transported specialized materials across enormous distances through imperial supply chains, or local engineers developed regional formulas capable of reproducing similar effects using different minerals. Both possibilities are extraordinary. The urban planning also appears unnaturally precise for a frontier installation. Magnetic surveys and excavation mapping revealed roads intersecting at highly consistent angles, with organized spacing between military and civilian sectors. Even more surprising, portions of the settlement maintained geometric alignment despite uneven terrain. Roman engineers used tools like the groma and chorobates for surveying, but Castramiscia demonstrates a level of large-scale coordination comparable to some planned Renaissance cities more than 1,000 years later. Some engineers studying the foundations notice layered construction techniques that may have unintentionally reduced structural stress during ground movement. Instead of placing massive rigid stone layers directly atop one another, builders sometimes alternated materials with slightly different densities and flexibility. Modern earthquake-resistant construction occasionally uses similar principles to distribute force and minimize cracking. Whether the Romans understood this mechanically or discovered it empirically remains unknown. Castramiscia is changing how historians view the Roman frontier. Instead of being just a defensive fort dependent on supplies from the empire's core, the site may once have functioned as a nearly self-sufficient center of technology and production. Archaeological evidence suggests Castramiscia was capable of producing weapons, tools, and construction materials on a massive scale. Many researchers now view the Roman Empire as a vast technological network capable of transferring engineering knowledge across thousands of kilometers. And Castramiscia may be one of the clearest examples of how efficiently that system once operated in the ancient world. Do you think the Romans truly understood engineering far beyond what history admits, or are we still missing a crucial piece of the story behind Castramiscia? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Western Turkey, near the slopes of Mount Mikail, about 15 kilometers from the Aegean coast, lies Priene, an ancient Greek city that should not have existed in the form archaeologists found it. The ruins were first systematically documented in the 19th century after European explorers noticed unnaturally straight stone streets cutting across a steep mountainside. Excavations led by German archaeologists in the 1800s uncovered something shocking: an entire city planned with near mathematical precision more than 2,300 years ago. Unlike most ancient cities that evolved chaotically over centuries, Priene appeared almost engineered. Streets intersected at nearly perfect right angles. Residential blocks followed standardized dimensions, and drainage channels were integrated directly into the urban layout. From above, the city looked less like an ancient settlement and more like a modern architectural blueprint carved into stone. What stunned researchers most was the terrain itself. Priene was not built on flat land like many Greek colonies. It was constructed on a steep rocky slope where maintaining alignment, elevation, consistency, and structural balance should have been extraordinarily difficult without advanced surveying instruments. Yet the city achieved a level of geometric organization that some historians compare to Roman military planning centuries later. Today, Priene remains one of the strongest pieces of evidence that ancient urban engineering may have been far more sophisticated than traditionally believed. The core mystery of Priene begins with its grid system. The city followed the Hippodamian plan, named after Hippodamus of Miletus, often called the father of urban planning, but Priene pushed the concept to an extreme level rarely seen in the ancient world. The city covered roughly 15 hectares and was divided into nearly uniform rectangular blocks. Main roads reached widths of about 7 meters, while smaller streets maintained consistent dimensions throughout the settlement. Archaeological measurements show many intersections deviated from 90 degrees by only tiny margins, despite the mountainous terrain. Modern engineers note that creating such precision on sloped ground without laser equipment, aerial surveying, or modern leveling systems would have required extraordinary mathematical skill. Even minor errors in elevation would have caused streets to drift off alignment over long distances, yet many roads in Priene remained remarkably straight across hundreds of meters. Researchers comparing Priene to other Greek cities found the difference striking. Athens evolved organically with irregular streets and uneven infrastructure, while Priene resembled a controlled engineering project. Some scholars believe the builders may have used advanced geometric triangulation methods combined with astronomical positioning, while others argue the precision suggests a surveying tradition far more developed than surviving historical records indicate. One of the least discussed but most technologically mysterious aspects of Priene is its hydraulic infrastructure. The city included underground drainage channels, stone-lined sewage systems, public fountains, pressure-fed water distribution, and carefully angled runoff networks. The entire city functioned around gravity-fed water control. Engineers studying the site discovered that many drainage channels were constructed with highly calculated slopes designed to maintain steady water movement while preventing erosion. This is significant because improper gradients destroy ancient drainage systems quickly. If the slope is too steep, water gains destructive velocity, while shallow slopes create stagnation and contamination. Yet several channels in Priene remained functional for centuries. Some archaeologists compare its hydraulic efficiency to Roman systems built hundreds of years later. In certain sectors, water channels were integrated beneath streets and homes with impressive uniformity, and evidence suggests wastewater separation may even have existed in parts of the city. The precision becomes even more remarkable considering the city received seasonal rainfall and faced constant erosion risks from the mountain above. Without effective water control, Priene should have suffered catastrophic structural instability. Instead, large sections survived for more than 2 millennia. Western Anatolia sits near active fault zones and has experienced major earthquakes throughout recorded history. Yet several structures in Priene remained standing far longer than expected. This led researchers to investigate the possibility that the city incorporated primitive anti-seismic engineering. Many foundations at Priene used layered stone placement designed to distribute weight across uneven terrain, while some walls were built using tightly interlocked stone blocks capable of absorbing minor movement rather than cracking instantly under stress. Certain retaining walls also appear intentionally flexible. Instead of relying purely on rigid vertical pressure, they used angled support geometry that redirected force laterally into the slope. Modern earthquake engineering uses similar principles involving force redistribution, controlled flexibility, and layered load transfer. The mystery is not whether ancient builders understood earthquakes. They clearly did. The mystery is how advanced that understanding may actually have been. In several structures, researchers found stone joints so precise that inserting a thin blade between blocks becomes difficult even today. Unlike the gigantic megalithic stones of Peru, Prini achieved precision through medium-sized standardized blocks, implying organized quarrying and possibly template-based cutting systems. At the center of the city stood Temple of Athena at Priene, designed by the famous architect Pythios, who also contributed to the mausoleum at Halicarnassus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The temple appears symmetrical at first glance, but detailed measurements revealed something extraordinary. Like the Parthenon in Athens, parts of the structure were intentionally distorted to create visual perfection. Columns were not perfectly straight, spacing varied slightly, and certain horizontal lines contained subtle curvature measured in millimeters. These corrections compensated for human optical illusion, making the temple appear more balanced to the eye. Achieving this required advanced geometry, understanding of perspective, predictive visual mathematics, and astonishing construction control. Some optical corrections are so subtle they remained unnoticed until modern surveying technology examined the ruins. Researchers argue this demonstrates that Greek architects were not simply builders. They were mathematical engineers manipulating perception itself. The deeper mystery is how such precision was consistently transferred from abstract design into physical stone construction without modern drafting technology. Another unresolved question involves logistics. Priene's location on steep terrain created a major engineering obstacle. Thousands of limestone and marble blocks had to be quarried, transported uphill, positioned and aligned precisely. Some blocks weighed several tons. Traditional explanations involve sledges, rollers, ramps, ropes, and animal labor, but many engineers believe these methods alone struggle to explain the efficiency implied by the city's scale and precision. Experimental archaeology has shown that transporting multi-ton stone uphill dramatically increases friction and instability, while maintaining accurate placement afterward becomes even harder. Several theorists suggest Priene's builders may have used compound pulley systems, wooden track mechanisms, counterweight lifting or modular scaffolding networks more sophisticated than commonly assumed. No complete ancient description survives, and that absence has fueled speculation that significant Greek engineering knowledge may have been lost over time. Do you think Priene was simply an extraordinary ancient city, or evidence that lost engineering knowledge once existed in the ancient world? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Jara Cave was discovered deep inside Egypt's western desert, roughly 120 kilometers from the Farafra oasis, in one of the driest regions on Earth. Annual rainfall here is often less than 2 millimeters. From the surface, the landscape looks almost lifeless. Endless limestone plains, fractured rock, and white chalk formations shaped by violent desert winds. Yet beneath this extreme environment lies a cave system filled with stalactites, underground chambers, mineral formations, and evidence that the Sahara was once green. The cave became internationally known after modern desert expeditions documented its interior in the late 20th century. What shocked geologists was not simply the existence of the cave, but the scale of water erosion required to create it. Jara Cave contains thick calcite deposits, smooth limestone walls, and large chambers carved by flowing water. In modern Sahara conditions, such geological activity should be nearly impossible. Scientists estimate that many sections of the cave formed during humid phases of the Sahara, between 6,000 and 10,000 years ago, when monsoon systems moved farther north than today. During that era, parts of the Sahara contained lakes, rivers, grasslands, and large animals. But even with those wetter conditions, many researchers argue that the complexity of Jara Cave still appears unusually advanced for the amount of moisture believed to have existed there. The greatest mystery surrounding Jara Cave is the sheer amount of water needed to create it. Limestone caves form when slightly acidic water dissolves calcium carbonate over extremely long periods of time. In regions like Slovenia's Karst Caves or Mammoth Cave in Kentucky, this process occurs under continuous rainfall and underground river activity. Jara Cave, however, exists inside a hyper-arid desert where surface water has almost completely vanished. Some chambers contain stalactites over 1 meter long. Under normal geological conditions, stalactites typically grow at rates between 0.1 and 3 millimeters per year. That means many formations inside Jara Cave may have required tens of thousands of years of stable water flow. The problem is that current climate models do not fully support such prolonged wet conditions in this region. This contradiction has led some geologists to propose that the Sahara once possessed underground aquifer systems far larger than previously imagined. Satellite radar surveys across North Africa have already revealed traces of ancient river networks buried beneath the sand. Jara Cave may have been connected to one of these forgotten water systems, possibly part of a massive subterranean drainage network that disappeared when the Sahara dried out. Inside and around the cave, archaeologists discovered stone tools, charcoal remains, and traces of prehistoric human occupation. These findings confirm that humans once travelled through this region thousands of years before the rise of ancient Egypt. What makes this extraordinary is the location itself. Today, surviving in this environment without modern navigation or water transport would be nearly impossible. Temperatures regularly exceed 40 degrees Celsius, and visibility during sandstorms can collapse within minutes. Yet prehistoric groups repeatedly return to this cave system. This suggests they possess sophisticated environmental knowledge. Some researchers believe ancient desert populations may have understood seasonal water cycles, underground moisture zones, and migratory routes with remarkable precision. In many ways, their survival strategies resemble advanced environmental engineering adapted to extreme climates. Comparisons have been made with the Nabateans of Petra, who later developed highly efficient desert water systems, and with ancient Saharan cultures that created stone-lined wells long before formal urban civilizations emerged. Jara Cave may preserve evidence of an earlier stage of this forgotten desert expertise. Several areas inside Jara Cave contain unusually smooth surfaces and geometric mineral layers that appear almost manufactured. Under flashlight illumination, parts of the cave resemble carved corridors rather than natural rock formations. Geologists explain that flowing mineral-rich water can create symmetrical calcite structures over time, especially in confined limestone systems. However, some formations display flat surfaces and sharp transitions uncommon in most natural caves. Early explorers even described portions of the cave as looking architectural. While there is no evidence that the cave itself was built by humans, researchers continue debating whether prehistoric inhabitants may have modified some chambers for shelter, storage, or ritual purposes. Similar arguments exist at sites like Derinkuyu in Turkey, where natural underground spaces were later expanded into massive human-engineered complexes. The question remains unresolved. How much of Jara Cave is purely geological, and how much may have been shaped by human adaptation? One of the lesser-known mysteries of Jara Cave involves its unusual acoustics. Certain chambers amplify sound dramatically, while others absorb echoes almost completely. A simple stone strike can produce vibrations that travel through multiple passages. Acoustic researchers studying prehistoric ritual sites have found that ancient humans often selected caves with naturally resonant properties. Sites such as the painted chambers of Lascaux in France and Altamira in Spain contain areas where sound behaves in highly unusual ways. Some anthropologists believe prehistoric rituals may have intentionally used echo effects to create psychological impact. At Jara Cave, several occupation traces appear near acoustically active chambers. Although this may be coincidence, it raises the possibility that ancient visitors recognized and deliberately used these strange sound properties. In total darkness, amplified echoes inside the cave would have created an almost supernatural experience. Despite the brutal heat outside, temperatures inside Jara Cave remain relatively stable. Some sections feel unexpectedly cool, even during the hottest periods of the year. Researchers believe hidden fissures may connect the cave to deeper underground voids, creating natural airflow systems. What puzzles scientists is the efficiency of this ventilation. In certain narrow passages, weak but consistent air movement can still be detected despite the apparent isolation of the chambers. Similar effects are seen in lava tube systems and deep karst caves, but Jara Cave's desert location makes the phenomenon more difficult to explain. This stable internal climate may explain why prehistoric humans repeatedly used the cave as a refuge. In a desert environment capable of killing travelers within hours, Jara Cave may have functioned as a natural survival shelter, with water access, controlled temperatures, and protection from sandstorms. Modern geological surveys suggest Jara Cave may not be isolated. Ground-penetrating radar and satellite imaging across Egypt's western desert have revealed subsurface anomalies consistent with buried voids and ancient drainage systems. Some researchers suspect Jara Cave could represent only one visible entrance into a much larger underground network hidden beneath the Sahara. If true, this would radically change scientific understanding of North Africa's geological past. Ancient river systems in the Sahara are already known to have stretched for hundreds of kilometers. NASA satellite imagery has identified fossil rivers beneath the desert sands that once carried enormous volumes of water. If underground cave systems formed alongside these rivers, vast sections of the Sahara may still conceal unexplored chambers, tunnels, and prehistoric occupation zones. In this scenario, Jara Cave is not merely a cave, is a surviving fragment of an ancient environmental system, destroyed by one of the most dramatic climate shifts in human history. Do you think Jara Cave is simply a rare geological formation, or evidence that ancient humans understood the Sahara far better than modern science once believed? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The Nile deserts of northern Sudan hide the pyramids of Nuri far from the crowds of Giza, rising from the sand like broken black teeth. More than 80 pyramids stand here, a royal necropolis of the Kushite kingdom built over 2,500 years ago. Some are small and shattered, others still dominate the horizon despite centuries of erosion, earthquakes, floods, and looting. Yet the greatest mystery is not why they were built. It is how a civilization with far fewer resources than Egypt engineered structures and underground tomb systems so advanced that parts of them still cannot be fully explained by modern archaeology. The site was first documented in detail during the 19th century by European explorers traveling south of Egypt. Later excavations revealed that Nuri became the burial ground of Kushite kings after the reign of Taharqa, one of the most powerful rulers of Nubia and Egypt combined. Archaeologists quickly realized this was not simply a copy of Egyptian pyramid culture. The engineering methods at Nuri were different. The geometry was different. Even the underground structures followed patterns unlike those found beneath most Egyptian pyramids. At first glance, the pyramids appear smaller than those at Giza. The Great Pyramid of Khufu originally stood around 146 meters tall, while the largest pyramid at Nuri likely reached around 50 meters. But the Kushite builders compensated with steeper angles, often exceeding 70 degrees. That made construction dramatically more dangerous. In structural engineering, steeper slopes increase lateral pressure and raise the risk of collapse. Yet many pyramids at Nuri remained standing for more than 2 millennia, despite being built with less durable sandstone and rubble cores instead of massive limestone blocks like those used in Egypt. Modern engineers studying the site noticed something unusual in the foundations. Beneath several pyramids are compacted layers of crushed stone and sand acting almost like primitive shock absorbers. Similar concepts are used today in seismic base isolation systems to distribute force and reduce stress during ground movement. No written Kushite engineering manuals survive, yet the builders somehow understood how to stabilize massive structures on terrain affected by seasonal groundwater changes from the Nile. Satellite imaging and geological surveys show the underground water table around Nuri has shifted repeatedly over thousands of years. Under such conditions, most ancient mud brick structures would have fractured or sunk. Many of the Nuri pyramids did not. But the real mystery begins underground. Beneath the pyramids lie burial chambers connected by long descending stairways and tunnels cut directly into bedrock. Some passages extend more than 20 meters below the surface. Today, many are flooded by groundwater, making exploration extremely dangerous. In 2019, underwater archaeologists used scuba equipment to enter submerged chambers beneath Taharqa's pyramid. What they found raised even more questions. The tunnels were astonishingly straight. Laser measurements showed some corridors deviated only a few centimeters over long distances carved through stone. Achieving that level of alignment without modern surveying tools is extremely difficult even today. Ancient workers supposedly used bronze chisels, stone hammers, ropes, and oil lamps. Yet the geometry suggests an understanding of spatial planning far beyond what historians once assumed about Kushite engineering. Even more puzzling are the tomb ceiling systems. Several burial chambers contained massive stone blocking mechanisms designed to permanently lock the tomb after burial. Unlike simple sealed doors in many Egyptian tombs, some chambers at Nuri appear to have used sliding stone barriers hidden within narrow shafts. Archaeologists discovered grooves carved into walls where multi-ton stone slabs could descend into place with remarkable precision. In some tombs, the entrance corridors narrow sharply before widening again deeper underground, creating spaces where large blocking stones could be maneuvered and dropped into exact positions. The engineering problem is enormous. Some blocking stones likely weighed several tons. Moving them underground through confined tunnels without cranes or iron machinery would have required carefully calculated force distribution, ramps, lubrication systems, or counterweights. Yet no surviving diagrams explain how this was done. Attempts to recreate similar systems experimentally have shown that even small errors in angle or friction would jam the stones permanently before reaching their final position. What makes the mystery even stranger is the precision of the grooves themselves. In some chambers, the channels guiding the stone blocks are cut with unusually smooth surfaces and nearly symmetrical dimensions. Archaeologists comparing them with Egyptian examples noticed that certain Nuri grooves appear more mechanically refined, despite the Kushite kingdom having fewer known resources than New Kingdom Egypt. Some researchers speculate that wooden sled systems combined with wet clay lubrication may have been used. Others believe hidden sand-release chambers could have acted like primitive hydraulic braking systems, controlling the descent speed of the stones. No consensus exists. Then there is the question of labor organization. The Pyramid of Taharqa alone may have required tens of thousands of tons of stone. Transporting that amount of material across desert terrain under temperatures exceeding 40 degrees Celsius would have demanded extraordinary logistics. Ancient inscriptions suggest Kush controlled major Nile trade routes and had access to gold wealth from Nubia. but economic strength alone does not explain the engineering coordination. At Giza, archaeologists found evidence of massive worker villages, bakeries, and supply chains. Comparable infrastructure around Nuri is far less visible, suggesting the Kushites may have relied on a different and possibly more mobile labour system. The astronomical alignment of the pyramids adds another layer of mystery. Many structures face roughly north-south, but not with the exact orientation patterns used in Egyptian royal pyramids. Studies comparing stellar alignments suggest the Kushites may have used different stars as reference points, potentially adapting their system to the southern skies more visible from Nubia. Some alignments appear connected to the rising positions of specific bright stars during the Kushite era around 700 BCE. If true, the builders possessed advanced observational astronomy without leaving behind detailed written records explaining their methods. Even the stone-cutting techniques remain controversial. Certain chamber walls display parallel cutting marks so regular that some researchers initially suspected later modifications. However, dating confirms many were original. Experimental archaeology has shown bronze tools can cut sandstone effectively, but reproducing identical grooves with ancient methods requires enormous time and skill. Some cuts inside Nuri chambers are so narrow and straight that maintaining them by torchlight underground would have been extraordinarily difficult. Then came the flooding. Over centuries, rising groundwater invaded many burial chambers. Some tunnels collapsed, others disappeared beneath dark subterranean lakes. Yet the flooding may ironically have preserved parts of the site from looters. Radar scans indicate there are still unopened voids beneath several pyramids. Entire chambers may remain untouched. That possibility has transformed Nuri into one of the most important archaeological mysteries in Africa. What do you think is still hidden beneath the flooded pyramids of Nuri? Could there still be untouched chambers waiting to reveal lost engineering secrets? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Carved between mountains, marshes, and the sea, Kaunos may contain some of the most technically impossible cliff tombs of the ancient world. Rising directly from vertical rock walls above the Dalyan River in southwestern Turkey, these massive stone facades were built more than 2,000 years ago with a level of precision that still confuses engineers today. The ruins of Kaunos were known locally for centuries, but systematic archaeological investigation began in the 19th century and expanded dramatically under Turkish excavations in the 1960s. What researchers uncovered was not simply a forgotten Greco-Roman city, but a highly advanced urban system positioned in one of the most unstable environments imaginable. Beneath layers of sediment and collapsed stone were theatres, baths, hydraulic systems, temples, harbours, and the famous Lycian-style cliff tombs that turned Kaunos into one of the greatest archaeological enigmas of Anatolia. One of the strangest mysteries surrounding Kaunos is geographical. Today the city sits several kilometres inland, surrounded by wetlands and reeds. Yet, in antiquity, Kaunos was a major Mediterranean port directly connected to the sea. Geological studies of the Dalyan Delta show that sediment carried by the Dalyan River gradually filled the harbour basin over centuries. Researchers estimate that thousands of tons of silt accumulated annually, slowly transforming navigable water into marshland. Ancient writers, including Strabo, described Kaunos as a prosperous harbour city, yet modern visitors see no coastline nearby. What shocks many archaeologists is evidence suggesting the inhabitants understood the silting process and repeatedly attempted to fight it. Excavations indicate the harbour was modified multiple times through dredging, retaining walls, and artificial channels designed to redirect water flow. Maintaining a functional harbour in such a high sediment environment would have required constant engineering intervention. Modern comparisons make this even more impressive. Similar sediment problems forced repeated large-scale dredging projects in ports like Alexandria and Venice using industrial technology, yet Kaunos attempted to solve comparable hydrological challenges over 2 millennia ago using primitive tools. Some researchers believe the city may have possessed surprisingly sophisticated observational knowledge of river behavior, erosion, and water currents. Although there is no evidence of formal hydraulic science, the scale of intervention suggests empirical engineering far beyond what is typically associated with regional Anatolian cities of the period. The most famous structures of Kaunos are its monumental rock-cut tombs, carved directly into nearly vertical cliffs overlooking the river valley. At first glance, they resemble ordinary temple facades, but the deeper researchers examine them, the stranger they become. Several tombs stand dozens of meters above the valley floor, in positions that remain extremely difficult to access even with modern climbing equipment. Their entrances are framed by perfectly symmetrical columns, geometric pediments, and flat-cut surfaces carved into unstable limestone cliffs. In some places, the stone was removed with such precision that deviation between opposite sides measures only a few centimeters despite the enormous scale. The question is simple. How did ancient workers create this level of symmetry on sheer vertical rock faces without modern scaffolding systems? The dominant theory suggests massive wooden platforms were anchored directly into the cliffside. However, almost no physical evidence of these support systems has survived. Some archaeologists argue that temporary beam sockets visible in the rock may indicate suspended working platforms, but reconstructing such structures reveals staggering logistical problems. To carve a facade 10 to 15 meters high, workers would have needed stable, load-bearing scaffolding, advanced rope systems, coordinated teams operating at dangerous heights, accurate measurement methods, and long-term structural planning. Even more mysterious is the consistency of proportions between multiple tombs. Researchers comparing the facades discovered repeated geometric ratios that imply standardized measurement systems. Certain column widths and spacing patterns appear mathematically controlled rather than improvised. This becomes remarkable when compared with many other rock-cut necropolises of the ancient world. At sites where carving occurred under less difficult conditions, asymmetry and uneven finishing are common, yet the Kaunos tombs maintain unusually balanced geometry despite their extreme location. Some engineers studying the site propose that ancient builders may have used suspended plumbline systems combined with horizontal reference grids carved directly into the stone before excavation began. Others suggest they may have worked from top to bottom, gradually lowering platforms as carving progressed. But no explanation fully resolves how such high precision was achieved repeatedly on unstable vertical surfaces. The mystery deepens further when considering erosion. The limestone cliffs have endured earthquakes, rain, temperature fluctuations, and wind exposure for over 2,000 years, yet many structural details remain recognizable. This suggests the builders intentionally selected portions of rock with specific density and fracture characteristics, implying geological knowledge gained through long-term experience. Even today, reconstructing these tombs using only period-accurate tools would be an enormous challenge. Kaunos existed beside marshlands notorious for insects and disease. Ancient sources repeatedly mention unhealthy air and severe malaria outbreaks in the region. Yet, despite these environmental dangers, the city developed into a major urban centre, capable of supporting large populations for centuries. Archaeologists discovered evidence of surprisingly advanced hydraulic planning beneath the ruins. Stone drainage channels were constructed with carefully calculated gradients that allowed water to flow continuously without destructive erosion. Public baths incorporated circulation systems designed to remove wastewater efficiently, while some residential zones appear intentionally elevated above the wettest areas of the valley. Researchers studying the drainage angles found that several channels maintained highly effective slopes remarkably similar to modern gravity-based water systems. Without laser measurement tools or modern surveying instruments, achieving these gradients would have required precise practical engineering. The city also appears to have separated clean water distribution from waste disposal in certain sectors. This level of sanitation planning was uncommon outside the largest Roman urban centres. Some historians argue Kaunos may represent an overlooked example of ancient environmental adaptation, where generations of builders gradually learned how to survive within an unstable swamp ecosystem through engineering rather than relocation. The theatre of Kaunos rises against the hillside with seating for thousands of spectators. What fascinates acoustic researchers is how effectively sound still travels through the structure today. The geometry of the seating rows, the angle of elevation, and the curvature of the performance area appear intentionally optimized for voice projection. Similar studies conducted in Epidaurus and other classical theatres demonstrated that ancient architects could manipulate reflected sound waves with astonishing effectiveness. At Kaunos, even whispers from the lower stage can sometimes be heard far above depending on atmospheric conditions. This suggests the builders possessed extensive empirical understanding of acoustics long before the mathematical physics of sound existed. The phenomenon likely emerged through generations of experimentation, but the precision involved continues to impress modern engineers. Inside several cliff tombs, archaeologists found burial chambers where carvings and surfaces survived unusually well, despite centuries of exposure. This raised an important question. Were the tombs intentionally designed to regulate humidity and airflow? Some chambers contain narrow ventilation gaps almost invisible from the exterior. These openings may have reduced moisture accumulation while stabilizing internal temperature. Similar passive airflow principles are used in some modern preservation architecture. If intentional, the design suggests ancient builders understood practical microclimate management through observation rather than formal science. The preservation conditions become even more surprising considering the humid marsh environment surrounding Kaunos. Organic decay, salt exposure, and moisture should have accelerated deterioration significantly. Perhaps the greatest mystery of Kaunos is that the city survived at all. Surrounded by steep mountains, marshlands, disease, and constant sediment buildup, Kaunos should have been an extremely difficult place to build a major settlement. Yet it remained an important trading centre for centuries through engineering solutions such as water control, reinforced infrastructure, and continuous urban redesign. Rather than conquering nature, Kaunos reveals how an ancient civilization adapted to a hostile environment through practical engineering and observation. Near the Balikh River in northern Syria, Tel Sabi Abyad may preserve evidence that humans were managing data, engineering climate-controlled buildings, and producing chemically advanced materials nearly 8,000 years ago. The site was first identified in the 20th century, but major excavations led by Dutch archaeologist Peter Ackermans in the 1980s revealed an enormous Neolithic settlement buried beneath layers of ash, collapsed mud brick architecture, storage rooms, painted walls, and thousands of mysterious clay objects. Tel Sabi Abyad dates mainly to around 7000 to 6000 BCE during the Neolithic period. At that time, most human communities were expected to be relatively small farming villages with limited social complexity. But the settlement uncovered in northern Syria challenged that assumption almost immediately. Archaeologists found evidence of planned architecture, specialized storage systems, industrial-scale food preservation, and what appeared to be administrative control. Some buildings contained rows of sealed containers arranged with surprising uniformity. Others were divided into narrow chambers that looked less like homes and more like controlled storage facilities. The settlement itself covered several occupation mounds and may have housed hundreds of people at different periods. That might not sound extraordinary by modern standards, but for the 7th millennium BCE, it represented a remarkably dense and organized community. Many researchers compared its complexity to systems that would not fully emerge in Mesopotamia until thousands of years later. One of the biggest mysteries is how rapidly this transformation appeared. In many parts of the ancient world, the transition from farming villages to structured administrative societies unfolded slowly across millennia. At Tel Sabi Abyad, however, the leap appears compressed into a much shorter period. The site gives the impression of a society evolving faster than expected, as if knowledge and techniques were already circulating through networks historians still poorly understand. Among the most controversial discoveries were hundreds of small clay tokens shaped into spheres, cones, discs, cylinders, and pyramids. At first glance, they looked insignificant, but researchers soon realized the shapes followed strict patterns. Some specialists believe the tokens functioned as one of the earliest known accounting systems in human history. Long before writing existed, these objects may have represented livestock, grain quantities, oil, or trade goods. Different shapes likely carried different meanings. Certain tokens were even found stored together inside sealed containers, suggesting they were being archived or protected. The implications are enormous. If correct, Tel Sabi Abyad preserves evidence that humans were managing information in symbolic form nearly 2,000 years before the rise of cuneiform writing in southern Mesopotamia. The precision is what continues to puzzle archaeologists. Many tokens were produced in nearly identical dimensions despite the absence of metal tools or standardized molds. That consistency hints at measurement systems and social rules sophisticated enough to maintain long-term administrative order. Some researchers compared the tokens to primitive data storage devices. Others described them as the ancestors of economic coding systems. Either way, they reveal a level of abstract thinking far beyond what many once imagined for Neolithic communities. The architecture of Tel Sabi Abyad may be even more surprising than its symbolic systems. The settlement was built largely from mud brick, straw, and clay, materials usually considered fragile. Yet some structures survived in recognizable form after nearly 8,000 years of erosion, seasonal flooding, and temperature extremes. Northern Syria experiences harsh environmental conditions. Summer temperatures can exceed 40 degrees Celsius, while winters can become cold and wet. Despite this, the buildings demonstrate advanced thermal behavior that modern engineers still study today. Walls were often constructed unusually thick, sometimes layered with alternating materials that improved insulation. Rooms were arranged in compact clusters that reduced heat exposure during the day, while retaining warmth at night. Certain buildings also appear to have used passive airflow channels that naturally circulated cooler air without mechanical systems. When researchers modeled the structures using modern thermal analysis, some concluded that these Neolithic buildings performed surprisingly well compared to traditional earthen architecture still used in parts of the Middle East today. This raises an uncomfortable question for archaeologists. How did people without mathematics, formal engineering theory, or metal instruments develop architecture that appears optimized for climate control? Some experts argue it was simply centuries of experimentation. Others believe the knowledge may have been transferred through cultural networks spanning much larger regions than previously assumed. Excavations also uncovered large ovens, workshops, grinding installations, and specialized production zones. This was not a random village economy. The site appears to show early forms of labor specialization. Several kilns reached temperatures estimated above 800 degrees Celsius. Maintaining such heat with prehistoric fuel systems requires careful oxygen regulation and controlled combustion. Even slight airflow miscalculations would collapse the temperature rapidly. Burn patterns inside the kilns suggest the inhabitants understood how to sustain stable heating conditions. That knowledge would later become essential for pottery production and eventually metallurgy. Some archaeologists believe Tel Sabi Abyad represents a transitional stage between simple farming settlements and the technological foundations that later produced bronze-working civilizations. What makes the discovery extraordinary is timing. Similar production complexity became common much later in other regions. Yet here it appears during a period many textbooks still describe as technologically primitive. One of the strangest mysteries involves the repeated burning of entire buildings. Several structures were not gradually abandoned. They were destroyed in intense fires that reached temperatures high enough to harden mud brick walls almost like ceramic material. At first, archaeologists assumed warfare or accidental fire, but the evidence did not fully support either explanation. Valuable objects were sometimes left carefully arranged inside rooms before the fires occurred. In other cases, burn patterns looked controlled rather than chaotic. Some researchers proposed ritual destruction. Others suggested sanitation practices, believing fire may have been used to eliminate insects, mold, or contamination. Another theory is even more intriguing. The inhabitants may have intentionally fired buildings to strengthen future foundations and improve structural durability. If true, it would indicate a practical understanding of material transformation centuries before formal material science existed. The most haunting mystery of Tel Sabi Abyad may be its surviving pigments. Archaeologists discovered traces of red, black, and white paint preserved on walls, pottery, storage containers, and architectural surfaces. That alone would be remarkable for material exposed to nearly 8,000 years of environmental damage. But laboratory analysis revealed something even stranger. Many pigments retained strong chemical stability, despite the region's brutal climate fluctuations. Some red pigments were rich in iron oxide compounds similar to hematite-based mineral paints. Black pigments may have originated from carbonized organic matter or manganese-rich minerals. White coatings contain carefully processed lime or gypsum mixtures. None of that is impossible individually. The mystery lies in the consistency. The pigment layers were often extraordinarily uniform in thickness. Microscopic examination showed controlled mixing ratios and unusually fine particle distribution. In some samples, mineral grains were crushed so evenly that researchers questioned how Neolithic craftsmen achieved such refinement without advanced grinding technology. Even more surprising, certain painted surfaces displayed resistance to moisture penetration. Scientists studying the wall fragments discovered that some coatings behaved almost like primitive protective sealants. The materials reduced cracking and slowed erosion despite centuries buried underground. Comparisons with later Bronze Age pigments revealed something unexpected. In several cases, the chemical stability of the Tel Sabi Abyad coatings rivaled or exceeded materials used thousands of years later. Modern conservation teams still debate whether this durability resulted from intentional engineering or accidental experimentation perfected over generations. Either possibility is astonishing, because if these people truly understood how to manipulate mineral chemistry to improve preservation, then the technological intelligence of Neolithic societies may have been dramatically underestimated. What do you think Tel Sabi Abyad really represents? A forgotten leap in human intelligence, or proof that ancient civilizations were far more advanced than we ever imagined? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Eridu stands near the ancient floodplains of southern Iraq, where one of humanity's oldest and most mysterious cities emerged thousands of years before the pyramids of Egypt. Today, many archaeologists consider Eridu the first true city on Earth, and one of the greatest technological enigmas of the ancient world. Discovered through 19th and 20th century excavations led by Iraqi and British archaeologists, Eridu appeared at first to be little more than a desert mound. But beneath the sand were the remains of a civilization dating back nearly 7,000 years, older than the pyramids of Egypt and older than Stonehenge. What researchers uncovered there challenged long-held assumptions about how civilization began. For decades, historians believed cities evolved slowly from small farming villages. Eridu does not seem to follow that pattern. Archaeological layers suggest that sophisticated urban planning, large ceremonial architecture, water management systems, and organized labor emerged there surprisingly early. In many ways, Eridu appears less like the beginning of civilization and more like the remains of a society that already understood the fundamentals of engineering and centralized control. One of the greatest mysteries surrounding Eridu is its impossible location. Southern Mesopotamia was an unstable environment dominated by marshes, seasonal flooding, salt contamination, and extreme summer temperatures that can exceed 50 degrees Celsius. Even modern agriculture in southern Iraq struggles with soil salinity and water control. Yet around 5,400 BCE, the people of Eridu established a permanent settlement that survived for thousands of years. This should not have been easy. Ancient farmers faced a deadly problem in Mesopotamia. Irrigation slowly poisons the soil. As water evaporates under intense heat, salt remains trapped in the ground. Over time, farmland becomes infertile. Archaeologists studying Sumerian agriculture estimate that wheat production in some southern Mesopotamian regions eventually collapsed because salinity became uncontrollable. But Eridu endured far longer than many neighboring settlements. Excavations revealed traces of ancient canals and carefully engineered water channels surrounding the city. Some researchers believe the inhabitants developed one of humanity's earliest hydraulic management systems. The canals were not random trenches dug into mud. Their gradients appear carefully controlled, allowing water to flow while reducing stagnation and salt accumulation. A slight engineering mistake would have flooded fields or poisoned them permanently, yet the system functioned for centuries. What makes this more mysterious is the technological timeline. This was thousands of years before advanced mathematics, before iron tools, and before large surveying instruments. The people of Eridu may have relied entirely on practical experimentation, observation of seasonal water behavior, and inherited technical knowledge passed down through generations. Some archaeologists argue that southern Mesopotamian civilization was built not on military conquest, but on mastery of water engineering. At the center of Eridu stood another anomaly, a massive religious complex rebuilt again and again for millennia. Archaeologists uncovered at least 18 successive temple layers stacked directly on top of each other. Instead of demolishing older structures completely, the inhabitants preserved them beneath newer construction, gradually creating an elevated sacred platform. This process would later evolve into the famous Mesopotamian ziggurats. The strange part is the consistency. Across thousands of years, the sacred center remained aligned almost perfectly in the same location. The builders repeatedly maintained the orientation and proportions of the temple, despite different generations, political changes, and environmental shifts. Such continuity suggests the existence of a highly stable cultural or technical tradition. Some researchers speculate that early Sumerian priests may have possessed sophisticated observational systems tied to astronomy or geographic positioning. Ancient Sumerian texts later described Eridu as the city of the god Enki, deity of wisdom, water, engineering, and creation. In myth, Eridu was not merely a city, it was where divine knowledge entered the human world. To modern scholars, these legends may preserve cultural memories of a place where early technological breakthroughs transformed human society forever. But among all the mysteries of Eridu, one stands above the rest: the survival of its mud brick architecture. Most of the city was constructed using sun-dried mud bricks, one of the weakest building materials imaginable. Mud brick is vulnerable to rain, wind erosion, salt crystallization, and temperature fluctuation. Under harsh conditions, untreated mud structures can collapse within decades, yet parts of Eridu survive for nearly 7,000 years. This has become one of the most overlooked engineering mysteries in archaeology. Researchers studying ancient Mesopotamian bricks discovered that the builders of Eridu did not simply shape mud and leave it to dry. The bricks often contained carefully balanced mixtures of clay, silt, straw, reeds, and organic temper materials. These additives dramatically reduced cracking during drying and improved structural flexibility. In some samples, microscopic analysis revealed mineral compositions that helped resist salt damage, one of the greatest environmental threats in southern Iraq. The science behind this is remarkable. Straw fibers act similarly to reinforcement material in modern composite engineering. As mud dries and contracts, fibers distribute stress throughout the brick, preventing catastrophic fractures. Certain clay compositions also improve thermal stability, reducing expansion and contraction caused by brutal desert heat cycles. Modern experiments recreating ancient Mesopotamian mud bricks found that correctly mixed organic additives could increase durability several times over compared to untreated mud. But there is another layer to the mystery. Many Eridu structures were built in areas with high groundwater salinity. Salt crystals expanding inside porous materials normally destroy mud brick over time. Modern concrete itself can suffer severe degradation under similar conditions. Yet some Eridu foundations remained identifiable after thousands of years buried beneath sediment and exposed to environmental extremes. Engineers still debate how ancient builders optimized these materials so effectively without modern chemistry. Some specialists believe the people of Eridu achieved this through centuries of empirical refinement. Others argue that the consistency of the bricks suggests standardized production methods far earlier than expected in human history. Comparisons with later civilizations make the puzzle even stranger. Egyptian pyramids relied primarily on limestone and granite. Roman engineering depended heavily on volcanic ash concrete. But Eridu's builders worked with mud, arguably the least durable major construction material, and still created structures that endured across entire epochs of civilization. In terms of material survival relative to available resources, Eridu may represent one of the greatest achievements of ancient engineering. Archaeologists also uncovered evidence suggesting organized labor and centralized administration. Storage facilities, production zones, and ceremonial architecture imply a coordinated society capable of mobilizing workers on a large scale. This raises another difficult question. How was such complexity managed before writing fully developed? The earliest proto-writing systems in Mesopotamia emerged thousands of years later, yet Eridu already displayed signs of economic coordination. Some researchers believe the inhabitants used clay tokens and symbolic accounting systems to track grain, labor, and trade long before formal cuneiform writing appeared. If true, Eridu may represent the birthplace not only of cities, but also of administration itself. Trade may have played an equally important role. Southern Mesopotamia lacked many natural resources, including stone, timber, and metal ores. Yet artifacts found at Eridu suggest long-distance exchange networks connecting distant regions of the Persian Gulf and beyond. This implies that maritime travel and organized trade routes existed far earlier than once believed. Do you think Eridu was simply humanity's first city? Or evidence that ancient civilizations understood engineering far beyond what we normally imagine? Share your thoughts in the comments below. One of the least understood ancient complexes in South America lies in Peru's Cusco region, close to the modern province of Espinar. More than 3,800 meters above sea level, the site was known locally for centuries, but archaeologists only began seriously studying its structures during the 20th century, when surveys revealed massive stone platforms, ceremonial compounds, terraces, and defensive walls spread across the mountain landscape. What shocked researchers was not only the scale of the complex, but the impossible geography surrounding it. The Andes are one of the harshest environments on Earth for ancient construction. Oxygen levels at this altitude are roughly 40% lower than at sea level. Temperatures can swing from intense sunlight during the day to near freezing conditions at night. Earthquakes frequently shake the region, and seasonal rains trigger landslides capable of destroying entire settlements. Yet Mauca Lacta was engineered to survive directly on unstable mountain terrain for centuries. Compared to many ancient settlements worldwide, the location makes little practical sense. Ancient Roman cities were often built near rivers and fertile plains. Egyptian cities developed along the Nile where transport was easier. But Mauca Lacta was constructed in an environment that actively resisted human habitation. That contradiction became the first major mystery surrounding the site. The most controversial feature of Mauca Lacta is its stone construction. Many walls contain blocks cut with unusually tight joints, resembling the famous masonry seen at Sacsayhuaman and other elite Andean sites. In some areas, researchers measured gaps of only a few millimeters between stones despite centuries of earthquakes and erosion. This creates a technical problem that archaeologists still debate today. The builders of the Andes did not possess iron tools comparable to medieval Europe. Most evidence suggests they primarily used hammerstones, harder volcanic rocks, bronze alloys, sand abrasion, and enormous manual labor. But experiments attempting to recreate similar stonework often require weeks of work for a single block. Several stones at Mauca Lacta also display unusually flat surfaces and symmetrical edges. Modern laser measurements at other Andean sites have revealed deviations smaller than those achieved by some early industrial masonry methods. This has led some engineers to argue that ancient Andean builders possessed far more advanced geometric knowledge than traditionally assumed. One unexplained detail involves the smoothness of certain cuts. Some surfaces contain parallel abrasion lines that resemble mechanical grinding. Mainstream archaeologists explain these as the result of prolonged polishing with quartz-rich sand and water. However, skeptics argue that maintaining such consistency across multiple stones at extreme altitude would have required extraordinary organization and precision. The mystery deepens when comparing Mauca Lacta to nearby settlements built during roughly the same era. Many ordinary settlements in the Andes used rough stone and mud mortar, yet elite ceremonial sites like Mauca Lacta suddenly display engineering precision that appears centuries ahead of surrounding architecture. Southern Peru lies within one of the world's most active seismic zones. The Nazca tectonic plate constantly pushes beneath South America, generating frequent earthquakes across the Andes. Modern engineers use flexible foundations and shock-absorbing systems to reduce structural collapse. Yet many ancient Andean structures already seem to incorporate similar principles. At Mauca Lacta, some walls lean slightly inward instead of standing vertically. Many stones are irregularly shaped and interlock almost like puzzle pieces. This design prevents walls from rigidly resisting seismic waves. Instead, the stones shift slightly during earthquakes and then settle back into place. Researchers comparing Andean masonry with modern earthquake-resistant engineering found surprising similarities. Japanese structural engineers studying Inca stonework noted that polygonal blocks distribute stress more effectively than rigid rectangular masonry during seismic activity. In modern tests, rectangular walls tend to crack along straight fracture lines, while irregular interlocking stones disperse energy more efficiently. The problem is that developing such engineering intuitively should have taken generations of experimentation. Yet many of the surviving structures demonstrate principles remarkably close to modern seismic design. Some archaeologists believe this knowledge emerged after centuries of rebuilding following earthquakes. Others argue the sophistication appeared too suddenly to be explained entirely through trial and error. One of the least understood features of Maukalakta is its water management system. Channels carved directly into stone run through parts of the complex with carefully controlled slopes. Even after centuries of erosion, some channels still guide rainwater effectively away from foundations. Hydraulic engineering at high altitude presents severe challenges. Water expands when freezing, creating pressure capable of cracking stone. Seasonal runoff can erode foundations within decades if drainage angles are incorrect. Modern mountain engineering relies heavily on hydrological modeling to prevent structural failure. Yet ancient builders at Maukalakta appear to have mastered these problems without written engineering manuals or modern mathematics. Researchers studying Inca and pre-Inca hydraulic systems found that many channels maintain gradients accurate enough to sustain controlled water flow without stagnation or destructive turbulence. Similar precision was documented at Machu Picchu, where drainage systems were so advanced that nearly 60% of the site's construction reportedly lies underground in hidden foundation and water control structures. At Maukalakta, archaeologists suspect much of the hydraulic network may still remain buried beneath layers of rock and sediment. Ground-penetrating surveys have been limited, meaning the true scale of the engineering system remains unknown. Another mystery involves the site's environmental design. The Andes experience extreme temperature fluctuations, powerful winds, and intense ultraviolet radiation due to altitude. Yet many structures at Maukalakta appear positioned to reduce wind exposure while maximizing solar heat absorption during daylight hours. Certain walls face angles that trap sunlight and slowly radiate warmth at night, functioning almost like passive thermal batteries. Modern architects call this bioclimatic or microclimate engineering. Today, similar principles are used in sustainable mountain architecture with computer simulations and thermal modeling. Ancient builders likely developed this knowledge through centuries of environmental observation, but the scale of integration at Maukalakta remains impressive. Some researchers believe the settlement was deliberately designed not only for survival, but for long-term habitation under conditions that should have been nearly unmanageable for large populations. Several structures at Maukalakta appear aligned with solar events, particularly solstices and seasonal transitions, important for agriculture in the Andes. Openings and ceremonial platforms may have functioned as observational markers, tracking the sun's movement across the mountains. Ancient Andean civilizations depended heavily on astronomical timing for planting and harvest cycles. Even small seasonal miscalculations at high altitude could result in catastrophic crop failure. This forced mountain societies to develop highly accurate observational systems. What makes Maukalakta unusual is the complexity of some alignments. Unlike simpler east-west orientations found at many ancient sites, some walls and pathways appear linked to specific solar angles interacting with surrounding peaks. Researchers still debate whether these alignments were intentional or coincidental. If intentional, they suggest an advanced understanding of horizon astronomy similar to systems observed at sites thousands of kilometers away, including Chaco Canyon in North America or Nabta Playa in Egypt. Do you think Maukalakta was simply the result of lost ancient knowledge, or evidence that ancient engineering was far more advanced than we realize? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Within the rugged mountains of northern Algeria, near the region of Kabylie, the ancient Kabyle settlements were never meant to become one of North Africa's strangest archaeological mysteries. Many of these mountain cities were first systematically documented during French colonial surveys in the 19th century, though local Berber communities had occupied the region for centuries before modern archaeology arrived. What shocked researchers was not simply the age of the settlements, but their engineering. Entire communities had been constructed on steep mountain slopes where modern urban planners would struggle to build even today. Some villages sit more than 800 meters above sea level, surrounded by unstable rock formations, seismic activity, and harsh seasonal weather. Yet many of their structures remain standing after hundreds, possibly over 1,000 years. Satellite terrain analysis later revealed something even stranger. The settlements were not randomly positioned. Many occupied mathematically advantageous ridges with optimal visibility, defensive geometry, and natural water capture potential. Archaeologists began comparing them to Inca mountain cities in Peru, particularly Machu Picchu. Despite being separated by an ocean and developing independently, the deeper researchers looked, the more difficult it became to explain how isolated mountain communities without advanced machinery achieved such precision. One of the greatest mysteries surrounding the ancient Kabyle cities is how they were physically constructed on terrain that should have made large-scale architecture nearly impossible. Many structures were built using dry stone masonry, a technique where stones are fitted together without mortar. But unlike ordinary stone stacking, Kabyle walls often display interlocking geometry that distributes pressure evenly across the structure. Some walls lean inward at carefully calculated angles, increasing resistance against earthquakes and slope collapse. Modern engineers studying ancient mountain architecture found similarities between Kabyle construction and anti-seismic systems used by the Incas. In both cases, flexibility appears to have been intentionally engineered into the stonework. During ground vibration, the walls can absorb movement rather than crack instantly. What makes this difficult to explain is the technological context. The Kabyle mountain communities did not possess advanced iron industries comparable to Rome. Archaeological finds mostly include primitive iron tools, stone hammers, and simple chisels. Yet some stone joints are so precise that inserting even a thin metal blade between blocks is nearly impossible. Geologists also discovered that many foundations were built directly into mountain bedrock, using carved anchoring channels. This significantly reduced landslide risk. Similar stabilization methods are used today in modern mountain engineering projects worth millions of dollars. The question remains, how did ancient builders without surveying lasers, cranes, or reinforced concrete achieve such long-term structural stability? Perhaps the most scientifically puzzling aspect of the Kabyle settlements is their water management system. Northern Algeria experiences highly irregular rainfall. Summers are dry, temperatures can exceed 35 degrees Celsius, and mountain evaporation rates are intense. Yet archaeological evidence suggests that some Kabyle settlements supported surprisingly dense populations for centuries. Researchers discovered underground cisterns, sloped drainage systems, and narrow hydraulic channels carved directly into stone. Several channels maintain gradients so precise that water could travel long distances without eroding the system itself. Hydraulic engineers examining these ruins noted that some slopes appear intentionally optimized to control water velocity. If water moved too quickly, erosion would destroy the channels. Too slowly, and sediment would clog them. The surviving systems suggest an advanced empirical understanding of fluid dynamics. Even more mysterious are traces of waterproofing compounds inside certain reservoirs. Chemical analysis detected mixtures containing clay, ash, lime, and silica-rich minerals. The formula resembles waterproof Roman hydraulic concrete in several functional ways, despite developing in geographically isolated mountain communities. Some reservoirs also maintain unusually cool temperatures internally, reducing evaporation. Researchers suspect the builders may have intentionally used subterranean airflow and thermal stone properties to create passive cooling systems. In a region where water determined survival, the Kabyle hydraulic systems appear far more sophisticated than historians once believed possible. Another unexplained feature is the strategic positioning of the settlements themselves. From many ancient Kabyle locations, observers can see neighboring mountain ridges dozens of kilometers away. Digital topographic reconstruction has shown that numerous sites maintain nearly uninterrupted lines of sight with one another. This has led researchers to believe the Kabyle communities may have operated a long-distance communication network using smoke, fire, reflective surfaces, or signal beacons. The precision is remarkable. Without satellite imagery or aerial mapping, the builders somehow selected positions that maximized both visibility and defensibility simultaneously. Some alignments show only minimal angular deviation despite the extremely difficult terrain. Military historians compare the system to Byzantine beacon chains and sections of the Great Wall signal towers in China. But unlike imperial states with centralized engineering institutions, the Kabyle settlements were decentralized mountain communities. This raises an uncomfortable historical question. Were these societies far more technologically organized than traditional history suggests? The mountains of Kabyle are not naturally suited for large-scale agriculture. Soil erosion is severe, flatland is limited, and seasonal rainfall is inconsistent. Yet ancient terraces built by Kabyle communities still survive today. Many terraces were constructed using retaining walls designed to slow water runoff while trapping nutrient-rich sediment. Modern environmental engineers studying the region found that some terrace systems dramatically reduce erosion, even after centuries of exposure. Several ancient agricultural zones also contain unexpectedly fertile soil layers. Chemical studies suggest long-term artificial enrichment using ash, decomposed organic material, and mineral-rich sediment. In effect, the Kabyle may have engineered sustainable mountain soil centuries before modern ecological agriculture. The terraces also create microclimates. Stone walls absorb heat during the day and release it slowly at night, reducing sudden temperature fluctuations that damage crops. Similar principles are now used in climate-adaptive agriculture. What remains unclear is how mountain communities with limited written records accumulated such advanced environmental knowledge over generations. Unlike many ancient civilizations that disappeared after conquest, Kabyle culture endured through waves of foreign empires including Phoenician, Roman, Byzantine, Arab, Ottoman, and French expansion. What fascinates historians is that many indigenous engineering traditions survived despite these occupations. Anthropologists believe this may indicate an unusually efficient oral knowledge system. Construction techniques, water management strategies, and agricultural methods appear to have been transmitted across generations without extensive written documentation. This parallels other highly resilient mountain civilizations such as communities in the Andes or Himalayas, where isolation protected technical traditions for centuries. But in the Kabyle case, the survival is even more surprising because North Africa experienced repeated military invasions and political upheaval over 2,000 years. Despite this, many mountain settlements preserved architectural identities unlike Roman or Arab urban models. Do you think the ancient Kabyle civilization possessed engineering knowledge far beyond what historians currently believe? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Avdat sits deep inside Israel's Negev desert, nearly 100 kilometers south of Jerusalem, in a region receiving barely 80 to 100 millimeters of rain per year. Modern archaeologists originally believed the site could never have supported a large, permanent population. Yet excavation revealed vineyards, massive reservoirs, terraces, caravan infrastructure, and advanced hydraulic engineering spread across an environment that today appears almost incapable of sustaining life. The ruins were first documented in the 19th century by European explorers traveling through the Negev. But large-scale excavations during the 20th century transformed Avdat from a forgotten desert ruin into one of the most puzzling ancient engineering sites in the Middle East. Archaeologists uncovered Byzantine churches, Nabatean fortifications, wine presses, agricultural terraces, and one of the most sophisticated desert water harvesting systems ever discovered from antiquity. What shocked researchers most was not the architecture itself, but the precision of the environmental adaptation. Unlike Egypt, Mesopotamia, or Rome, Avdat had no major river, no permanent lake, and no reliable groundwater source. By every normal agricultural standard, the city should not have survived for centuries, yet it did. The central mystery of Avdat is simple but deeply unsettling. How did ancient people transform violent desert floods into a stable agricultural economy nearly 2,000 years ago? The Nabateans, the same civilization associated with Petra, developed an enormous runoff farming system across the Negev. Instead of relying on constant water supplies, they engineered the landscape itself to capture sudden flash floods caused by seasonal rainstorms in nearby highlands. Satellite imaging and modern hydrological surveys show networks of stone channels, diversion walls, terraces, and catchment basins extending across the desert around Avdat. During storms, water rushing through wadis was slowed, redirected, filtered, and absorbed into carefully prepared agricultural plots. What makes this extraordinary is the precision involved. Modern hydrologists note that a small miscalculation in slope angle or channel width would have caused catastrophic erosion. Yet many channels maintained stable gradients over hundreds of meters. Some researchers compared portions of the hydraulic planning to Roman aqueduct engineering, despite the Nabateans lacking the industrial infrastructure of Rome. Even more surprising, several terrace systems around Avdat remained structurally intact after nearly 2 millennia of desert floods. In modern arid environments, erosion destroys poorly designed earthworks within decades. Avdat's agricultural infrastructure survived for centuries. One of the greatest scientific debates surrounding Avdat involves its agricultural productivity. Ancient records and archaeological evidence suggest the city exported wine and agricultural products across regional trade networks. But this should not have been possible. The Negev desert has thin soil, extreme evaporation, violent temperature swings, and minimal rainfall. Yet excavations uncovered large wine presses, storage facilities, and evidence of extensive vineyards. Researchers estimate some Nabatean farms produced yields surprisingly high for a hyper-arid climate. So how do they do it? Sediment analysis revealed that the Nabateans manipulated flood deposits with remarkable sophistication. Flash floods carried nutrient-rich silt from surrounding hills, which became trapped behind terrace walls. Over time, these sediments created deeper moisture-retaining soil layers. Some environmental historians compare the process to the creation of terra preta in the Amazon basin, artificially enhanced fertile soil engineered by ancient societies. But the comparison becomes even more astonishing when climate is considered. Amazonian terra preta formed in humid rainforest ecosystems. Avdat achieved agricultural sustainability in one of the harshest dryland environments on Earth. Modern agricultural scientists studying desertification have repeatedly referenced Nabatean runoff farming as a model for sustainable agriculture under climate stress. That alone raises uncomfortable questions about how advanced their environmental understanding truly was. Avdat's water reservoirs remain among the site's most controversial engineering achievements. Some cisterns carved into limestone cliffs still preserve structural integrity after nearly 2,000 years of thermal stress, floods, and seismic activity. Several reservoirs included plaster-like waterproof coatings whose durability surprised modern engineers. In certain areas, ancient linings survived environmental conditions that damage modern concrete infrastructure within decades. But the real mystery lies in placement and efficiency. The reservoirs were not randomly distributed. They were positioned to maximize runoff collection from multiple drainage directions while minimizing sediment overload. Some incorporated primitive sediment traps that reduced clogging after floods. Hydraulic simulations conducted in recent years demonstrated that certain reservoir systems at Avdat retained water far more efficiently than researchers originally expected. The system appears optimized for a climate where rainfall is rare but extremely intense. In other words, the Nabateans did not merely react to desert conditions, they engineered entire landscapes around statistical patterns of catastrophic weather. Avdat was not an isolated survival settlement. It became a major station along the incense route connecting southern Arabia with the Mediterranean world. This creates another enormous mystery. Maintaining long-distance caravan trade through the Negev required stable supplies of water, food, shelter, and security for thousands of camels and merchants moving across the desert. Archaeologists discovered warehouses, agricultural facilities, caravan stations, and sophisticated urban structures, indicating Avdat functioned as a logistical hub, rather than a small oasis village. Chemical analysis of residue inside amphorae revealed evidence of wine production significant enough for regional export. Some isotopic studies suggest products from the Negev reached Mediterranean markets. This means a civilization operating in one of the driest regions of the Middle East somehow developed a surplus economy capable of participating in international trade. Compared to other ancient desert settlements, Avdat appears unusually resilient. Many caravan cities collapsed rapidly after trade disruptions or drought cycles. Avdat persisted for centuries. The architecture of Avdat also presents technical puzzles rarely discussed outside specialist archaeology. Many walls were constructed using stress distribution techniques unusually effective against seismic vibration and thermal cracking. Instead of concentrating weight vertically, portions of the masonry spread loads laterally across irregular limestone foundations. Engineers studying the site noted similarities between some Nabatean stabilization methods and modern anti-fracture principles used in dry climate construction. Another unresolved mystery involves weathering resistance. Certain stone surfaces at Avdat eroded far more slowly than expected under harsh desert exposure. Some researchers proposed mineral surface treatments or environmental chemical interactions that are still poorly understood. Wind erosion in the Negev can be severe. Temperature fluctuations between day and night often exceed 20 degrees Celsius. Over centuries, this normally fractures exposed stone aggressively, yet parts of Avdat survived with remarkable preservation. Perhaps the strangest aspect of Avdat is how much invisible knowledge was embedded into the terrain itself. The city's success depended on predicting flood direction, sediment movement, evaporation rates, seasonal rainfall behavior, and soil retention properties across enormous areas of desert. Today, similar environmental modeling often requires satellite observation, hydrological software, and long-term climate data. The Nabateans achieved practical mastery using observation alone. Some modern archaeologists argue that Avdat represents one of the earliest large-scale examples of ecological engineering, reshaping entire ecosystems rather than merely building cities within them. This may explain why Avdat fascinates climate scientists today. In an era of growing water scarcity, ancient Nabatean techniques are being re-examined as possible solutions for modern desert agriculture. What do you think really caused the fall of Avdat? Climate change, collapsing trade routes, or the loss of forgotten engineering knowledge? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Perched on a near-vertical rock fortress in the plains of Pamphylia, Silion was a city that somehow mastered water, stone, and survival, hundreds of meters above the ground long before modern engineering existed. Located about 30 kilometers northeast of modern Antalya in southern Turkey, Silion was known in ancient Greek and Roman records for centuries, but systematic archaeological surveys only intensified during the 19th and 20th centuries. as researchers began mapping the hidden ruins spread across the mountain summit. The first mystery of Selion is simple. Why build an entire city on top of an isolated stone mountain nearly 300 meters high? Unlike many ancient settlements that formed around rivers or fertile valleys, Selion sits on a steep rocky plateau with almost no natural advantages except defense. The cliffs surrounding the city are so steep that ancient historians described it as nearly impossible to conquer. Even armies moving through Anatolia during the campaigns of Alexander the Great reportedly avoided direct assaults on heavily fortified mountain cities like this, because the cost of attacking them was enormous. But defense alone does not explain the engineering challenge. To construct Selion, ancient builders had to transport thousands of tons of stone, timber, tools and food supplies uphill across rough terrain, without cranes, engines or steel machinery. Some retaining walls still standing today contain massive stone blocks fitted with unusual precision. In several sections, the gaps between stones remain incredibly tight despite nearly 2,000 years of earthquakes, erosion and weathering. Researchers often compare this style of tight polygonal masonry to sites such as Sacsayhuaman or Machu Picchu, because the stones appear carefully shaped to distribute force across uneven surfaces. While Selion was built by a completely different civilization, the underlying engineering principle appears strangely similar. Structures designed to survive instability by allowing energy to spread through interlocking geometry rather than rigid straight lines. That detail becomes even more shocking when considering the seismic activity of Anatolia. Southern Turkey sits near active tectonic zones, meaning these walls endured repeated ground movement for centuries. Yet parts of the city still remain attached to the cliff face with remarkable stability. The greatest unsolved engineering puzzle of Selion is not its walls or theatre. It is water. Ancient cities survive or die based on water access, and Selion should never have survived at all. The mountain summit contains no major natural spring capable of supporting a large urban population. Yet archaeological surveys uncovered enormous cisterns carved directly into bedrock, underground reservoirs, drainage tunnels, and sophisticated channels designed to collect and preserve rainwater with extraordinary efficiency. Some cisterns are estimated to hold hundreds of cubic meters of water. That alone is impressive, but the real mystery is precision. Water systems in ancient cities depended entirely on gravity. If a channel descended too steeply, flowing water would erode the stone and destroy the structure. If the angle was too shallow, water would stagnate or fail to move entirely. Modern hydraulic engineering uses laser measurement systems and advanced surveying equipment to calculate these gradients. The builders of Selion had none of these technologies. Yet many surviving channels maintain slopes accurate enough to keep water moving steadily across difficult rocky terrain. This has led some researchers to compare Selion's hydraulic planning to the Nabatean systems of Petra. In Petra, engineers controlled flash floods and redirected water across desert cliffs with gradients so precise that modern studies found deviations sometimes measured only in millimeters per meter. Selion appears to show a similar understanding of hydraulic balance. The city's engineers also seem to understand long-term water preservation. Several reservoirs were coated internally with waterproof plaster mixtures containing lime compounds and crushed ceramics, materials known to improve resistance against leakage and bacterial growth. Roman hydraulic concrete using volcanic ash was famous for durability, but Selion's mountain cisterns reveal that regional engineers may have adapted comparable methods using locally available minerals. Even more fascinating is the possibility that the city operated as a giant rain harvesting machine. The mountain's steep slopes naturally accelerated runoff during storms. Instead of allowing water to escape downhill, channels redirected it into storage chambers throughout the city. This means Selion's survival may have depended not on a river, but on carefully engineered control of seasonal rainfall. That level of planning required advanced surveying, precise stone cutting, understanding of pressure and flow, and long-term urban resource management. In other words, this was not primitive engineering, it was systems engineering. Beneath parts of Selion are underground chambers and carved passageways, whose full extent remains unclear. Some tunnels likely served military purposes, allowing defenders to move supplies or access hidden storage areas during sieges, but several carved surfaces raise uncomfortable questions for archaeologists. Some sections display unusually flat cuts and sharp internal angles carved directly into limestone. Reproducing those surfaces using only basic bronze tools would have been extremely slow. Iron tools were available later, but the consistency of certain cuts suggests highly organized labor and surprisingly advanced stoneworking methods. Experimental archaeologists have proposed multiple explanations, including heating rock with fire and rapidly cooling it to fracture surfaces, wooden wedges soaked in water to expand inside cracks, hardened iron chisels, or abrasive sand cutting techniques. Yet none fully explain the speed required to shape an entire fortified mountain city. At sites throughout the ancient world, difficult stonework repeatedly appears in places where civilizations faced extreme environmental challenges. The Incas shaped earthquake-resistant stone walls in Peru. The Nabateans carved entire structures into sandstone cliffs. The Romans drilled tunnels through mountains for aqueducts. Selion belongs in that same category of ancient engineering that feels disturbingly advanced for its era. The remains of Selion's theatre reveal another technical mystery: acoustics. Ancient theatres across the Greek and Roman world were famous for amplifying sound naturally, but Selion's elevated location may have enhanced this effect even further. The curved seating arrangement, combined with reflective stone surfaces and the surrounding cliff geometry, created an unusually effective resonance chamber. Modern acoustic studies at ancient theatres show that certain designs amplified speech frequencies between roughly 500 and 4,000 Hz, the exact range most important for human vocal clarity. Builders clearly understood through experimentation that geometry could manipulate sound. At Selion, the mountain itself may have functioned as part of the acoustic design. If intentional, this suggests the city's architects possessed sophisticated empirical knowledge of wave reflection centuries before the formal science of acoustics existed. Ancient records describe Selion as extraordinarily difficult to capture. From the summit, defenders could monitor movement across much of the Pamphylian plain and nearby trade routes connected to the Mediterranean coast. This strategic advantage transformed the city into more than a settlement. It became a surveillance platform, military fortress, and emergency refuge combined into one. The mountain's steep sides acted like natural defensive walls. Attackers climbing uphill would exhaust themselves long before reaching the gates, while defenders above maintained visibility in every direction. Combined with large water reserves and internal storage systems, Selion may have been capable of surviving sieges for extended periods. That raises another mystery. If the city was so defensible, why was it eventually abandoned? What do you think really caused the fall of Selion? Earthquakes, water failure, or something historians still have not discovered? Share your thoughts in the comments below. A few kilometers north of Jericho, one of the hottest inhabited regions on Earth, the ruins of Hisham's palace hide technology that should not exist in an 8th century desert palace. Beneath collapsed stone walls lie advanced heated floors, earthquake-resistant foundations, hydraulic engineering, and one of the most mathematically precise mosaics ever discovered from the early Islamic world. Even after more than 1,300 years of earthquakes, extreme heat, and erosion, parts of the palace still preserve details so accurate that laser scans struggle to explain how they were achieved using only hand tools. The ruins were first seriously investigated in the 1930s by archaeologists from the British Mandate Department of Antiquities. Excavations revealed that the site covered nearly 60 hectares, making it one of the largest Umayyad desert palace complexes ever discovered. What stunned archaeologists was not only the scale, but the sophistication. The palace contained bathhouses, underground heating systems, water channels, decorative marble, carved stucco, and an enormous mosaic floor, unlike almost anything found in the region. Many researchers initially believed parts of the structure were later additions, because several engineering techniques seemed too advanced for the early 8th century. Later, dating confirmed most of the complex belonged to the Umayyad period, likely constructed during the reign of Caliph Hisham ibn Abd al-Malik around 740 CE. Then came the larger mystery. The palace appears to have been abruptly abandoned after the devastating earthquake of 749 CE, freezing the site in time. The most famous mystery inside Hisham's palace is the legendary Tree of Life mosaic. Covering roughly 825 square meters, it is considered one of the largest and finest mosaics ever found in the Middle East. At first glance, the mosaic appears decorative, but modern analysis revealed something far stranger. The artwork contains over 1 million tesserae, tiny stone cubes often measuring less than 1 centimeter across. Researchers using digital mapping found that many curved sections maintain remarkably consistent angular symmetry over long distances. In several areas, deviation from intended geometric alignment is less than 2 millimeters across multiple meters of surface. That level of consistency is difficult even with modern guidelines and measuring equipment. Yet the mosaic builders achieved it using primitive tools, natural pigments, and hand-cut stone. The central image itself is deeply symbolic, a tree flanked by peaceful gazelles on one side and a lion attacking prey on the other. Historians interpret it as a representation of peace and power, but some researchers focus more on the engineering than the symbolism. The tesserae were cut from limestone, marble, and coloured minerals transported from different regions. Red stones likely contained iron oxides, while darker tones may have used manganese-rich minerals. Several pigments still remain vivid after more than 13 centuries despite Jericho's harsh climate, where summer temperatures regularly exceed 40 degrees Celsius. Material scientists studying surviving sections discovered evidence that some stones may have undergone controlled heating before placement to stabilize coloration and reduce weathering. If correct, this suggests the builders possessed practical knowledge of thermal mineral treatment centuries before similar documented methods became common elsewhere. Even more mysterious is the layout precision. To maintain alignment over such a massive floor, workers would have needed accurate reference grids and long-distance measurement systems. Yet no surviving measuring instruments from the site explain how this was done. Comparisons with Roman mosaics from places like Pompeii show that while Roman artists achieved extraordinary detail, the geometric regularity at Hisham's palace rivals some of the finest late imperial examples, despite being built in a very different political and economic environment. Some archaeologists believe the palace inherited lost Byzantine engineering traditions. Others argue the Umayyads had already developed their own highly organized mathematical construction systems. The truth remains uncertain. Hidden below the palace is another astonishing technological mystery, a hypocaust heating system similar to those used in elite Roman bathhouses. Underneath the floors, rows of small brick pillars supported elevated stone surfaces while hot air circulated beneath them. This allowed rooms to be heated evenly from below, essentially an ancient form of central heating. The engineering challenge was enormous. If airflow tunnels were uneven by even a small margin, heat distribution would fail. Yet thermal studies of reconstructed sections suggest the system maintained surprisingly balanced heat flow. Researchers also found evidence that some floor materials were specifically designed to withstand repeated thermal expansion and contraction. Certain mortar samples contain silica-rich compounds and volcanic ash components similar to pozzolanic mixtures used in Roman concrete. The strange part is geography. Jericho is nowhere near major volcanic regions. Transporting volcanic material across such distances would have required expensive trade networks and deliberate engineering choices. This implies the builders intentionally selected specialized materials for heat resistance rather than simply using locally available resources. Several engineers comparing the palace to Roman bath complexes noted similarities in thermal efficiency. But the palace was constructed centuries after the decline of Western Roman authority, raising difficult questions about how such technical knowledge survived and spread across the region. The palace sits near the Jordan Rift Valley, one of the most seismically active regions in the Middle East. The earthquake of 749 CE devastated cities across the Levant, including parts of Jerusalem, Tiberias, and Jericho. Yet some sections of Hisham's palace survived unexpectedly well. Structural analysis revealed unusual construction techniques inside certain walls. Instead of using purely solid masonry, builders alternated stone layers with softer internal materials capable of absorbing vibration. Several foundations also contained layered gravel and compacted soil systems that may have functioned as primitive shock absorbers. Modern seismic engineers have compared the concept to methods later observed in Byzantine architecture and even certain Inca structures in Peru. Whether this design was intentional remains debated. But if deliberate, it suggests the builders understood practical seismic behavior through observation and accumulated experience long before modern geology existed. The unsettling implication is that ancient engineers may have possessed far more empirical knowledge about earthquakes than surviving written records indicate. Water management at the palace remains another unresolved mystery. Jericho receives very limited rainfall, yet the complex included baths, fountains, ornamental pools, and irrigation systems requiring continuous water flow. Archaeologists discovered narrow channels built with extremely subtle gradients to maintain natural pressure and movement. In some areas, slope variation is so slight that errors of only a few centimeters could have disrupted the entire system. Researchers studying surviving plaster coatings identified waterproof compounds made from lime, ash, and crushed ceramics. Similar hydraulic plasters were used in Roman ports and cisterns because they resisted cracking and mineral leakage. The larger question is sustainability. Climate reconstruction suggests maintaining such a luxurious hydraulic system in the 8th century may have required far more water than local springs alone could reliably provide during dry periods. This has led some historians to suspect the existence of a much larger regional water distribution network that has not yet been fully uncovered. What do you think the builders of Hisham's palace really knew about engineering and mathematics over 13 centuries ago? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below.